Meanwhile, Han Li wasn't just standing idly on the spot. He rustled both sleeves at once, and a series of talismans shot forth before circling through the air, shimmering with silver runes. These talismans were all quite mysterious, and 108 of them were summoned at once. Han Li made a hand seal before rapidly pointing his fingers in succession toward the lightning clouds down below with a grave expression on his face. The talismans immediately transformed into 108 streaks of silver light that disappeared right in front of Han Li. In the next instant, silver light flashed above the giant lightning cloud, and the silver runes reappeared. They surged through the air to form a strange diagram that encompassed the entire lightning cloud below. Han Li cast an incantation seal, and all of the talismans exploded in unison, creating a massive silver light formation. Within the formation, a projection of a large palace appeared in a mirage-like manner, as if it weren't actually a part of this world. The palace was shimmering with silver light, and there were countless runes dancing in the air above it. At the same time, heavenly music sounded, captivating the listener with its delightful beauty. However, as soon as the listener tried to listen more closely to the music, it would abruptly disappear. Han Li was ecstatic to see the realization of the formation, and he hurriedly made a hand seal, upon the formation slowly descended. Right at this moment, a thunderous roar erupted from within the lightning cloud. Following a few earth-shattering thunderclaps, the azure lighting cloud tumbled and surged violently, and several arcs of lightning that were as thick as water tanks forced their way out of the lightning. The huge bolts of lightning circled around within the lightning cloud like a series of menacing giant dragons, and the entire lightning cloud was eradicated within moments. After the lightning cloud was eradicated, the arcs of lightning also disappeared, and the infernal lightning beast was revealed in the distance again. At this moment, the beast was in an extremely sorry state. Not only had its scales become dull and lusterless, the parts of its body that weren't covered in scales had been completely charred black. Only the single horn on its head was still shimmering with silver light, as thin arcs of electricity revolved around it. Those thick bolts of silver lightning had clearly been unleashed by none other than that horn. What was even more surprising was that as soon as the beast was revealed, it immediately opened its mouth to expel a burst of crimson light, within which 3 flashing specks of golden light could be seen. Those 3 specks of light were emitting a faint buzzing sound, and they were none other than his gold-devouring beetles. They had been forced out of the beast's body by its immense magic power. A shiver immediately ran down Han Li's spine upon seeing this. After the beetles had been swallowed by the beast, Han Li had been overjoyed, and as a result, a hint of killing intent had welled up in his heart. Only after witnessing the scenes that had just unfolded did he realize how delusional he'd been. As such, he immediately relinquished any intention of killing this beast. Han Li looked down to discover his azure bamboo cloudswarm sword was hovering beneath one of the infernal lightning beast's paws, and it was shimmering with faint golden light. It was quite clear that the infernal lightning beast had dropped the sword, as it was too busy dealing with the attacks from the gold-devouring beetles and the lightning cloud. In any case, the sword didn't appear to pose any threat to it, so there was no need for it to pay it any heed. At this moment, the infernal lightning beast was glowering intently at Han Li, with fury and ferocity in its eyes. Having just withstood that devastating string of attacks, it wanted nothing better than to tear Han Li apart with its bare claws. However, Han Li certainly wasn't going to stand around and wait for it. He waved a hand through the air, and the 3 gold-devouring beetles emerged from the crimson light before flying back to him. The small golden sword also tremored before abruptly disappearing on the spot. Golden light flashed as the small sword reappeared beside Han Li, then disappeared without a trace up his sleeve. Immediately thereafter, the gold-devouring beetles were also stowed away in the same manner. The infernal lightning beast faltered upon seeing this before letting loose a deafening roar of fury. Just as it was about to spring into action, silver light flashed above its head, and a massive light formation descended from above in a stealthy manner. With such a massive formation overhead, even if the infernal lightning beast hadn't noticed it at first, there was no way that the formation would continue to escape the beast's detection. It raised its head, and a hint of astonishment flashed through its eyes as it caught sight of the massive formation. A thunderclap erupted from its sharp horn, following which a thick bolt of silver lightning shot forth. The bolt of lightning struck the underside of the light formation amid a rumbling boom, but it then suddenly disappeared following a flash of silver light, as if it had been engulfed by the formation. Only then did the beast realize the perilous situation that it was in. Lightning flashed from its four limbs as it immediately attempted to flee the scene, but it was already too late. The light formation rotated in midair before disappearing in a flash. Meanwhile, the infernal lightning beast had shot back over 100 feet, only for a burst of silver light to flash before its eyes, following which it found itself in a swath of white mist. It surveyed its surroundings to find countless tall walls and buildings around it, stretching as far as the eyes could see in all directions. The beast's heart jolted with shock initially, but it quickly calmed down. It had lived for countless years, and it had experienced more than its fair share of situations where it had been trapped in formations by its enemies, so it was able to remain tranquil and unflustered in this situation. It raised its head to look up into the sky, only to find a vast expanse of murky silver light that completely obstructed its vision. The infernal lightning beast cocked its head to the side and contemplated its current predicament, then rose up into the air as an arc of silver lightning, slashing its claws through space during the process. A dozen or so azure claw projections hurled forth in a flash, crashing heavily against the silver light barrier. Silver and azure light intertwined amid a string of dull thump, and the silver light barrier tremored slightly before falling still again. The infernal lightning beast faltered in midair with a slightly surprised expression upon seeing this, seemingly slightly taken aback by how powerful this restriction was. Unbeknownst to the infernal lightning beast, this light formation had been conjured up by the 9 palaces' heavenly talismans, which Han Li had only managed to refine after extensive periods of painstaking effort. There were a total of 108 such talismans, and they were extremely effective for trapping enemies. Of course, that also depended on what kind of being was trapped within this formation. At Han Li's current cultivation base, he wouldn't even be able to truly trap an average body integration stage being, let alone this infernal lightning beast. He was currently standing at the edge of the light formation, injecting his magic power into one of the 108 talismans in a frenzy. When the beast within unleashed that earlier attack, Han Li had felt a burst of immense power being transmitted into his body, forcing him to stumble back a few steps as his expression changed drastically. Thankfully, he was able to recover after circulating his magic power throughout his body. However, it was quite apparent that this restriction wasn't going to be able to contain this beast for long. After all, the gulf in cultivation base between himself and this infernal lightning beast was nothing if not night and day. However, he wasn't counting on this formation to trap the beast in the first place. All he needed was for it to buy him some time. Seeing as the formation had temporarily trapped his opponent, Han Li immediately withdrew his hand before flapping his wings and flying away as a streak of azure light, heading straight toward the direction he'd come from. After a few flashes, Han Li had reached the end of the horizon, and he would disappear from view after just one more flash. However, right at this moment, Han Li's expression suddenly changed as he swept a hand through the air. Several tens of small golden swords shot forth in unison, piercing toward a certain spot in space. An astonishing scene then ensued. White light flashed from the location that the golden swords were flying toward, and a white-robed woman with a missing arm suddenly appeared. It was none other than that ghostly woman whom Han Li had battled once. The woman was also quite stunned that Han Li had managed to detect its presence. She seemed to be about to say something, but Han Li wasn't interested in hearing what she was about to say as a cold light flashed through his eyes. All of a sudden, a loud cry erupted from within one of his sleeves, following which a streak of black light shot forth, then faded to reveal a small black monkey. It was none other than the weeping soul beast. Han Li was currently running for his life, and the last thing he needed was a prolonged battle with this ghostly woman. As such, he immediately summoned his weeping soul beast to take care of her as quickly as possible. As soon as the white-robed ghostly woman caught sight of the weeping soul beast, she let loose a sharp shriek as an expression of horror appeared on her face. She abruptly transformed into a streak of white chi and attempted to flee. But the weeping soul beast was even faster, transforming into a massive ape that was several tens of feet tall in the blink of an eye, then letting loose a cold harumph to expel a swath of yellow light from its nostrils. The yellow light immediately enshrouded the streak of white chi, then dragged it back toward the weeping soul beast. The white light faded to reveal the white-robed ghostly woman again, and in her horror, her white robes transformed into a pristine white barrier of light that completely shielded her entire body. Surprisingly enough, the barrier of light managed to withstand the weeping soul beast's soul-devouring light. Grave expression appeared on the weeping soul beast's face and it let loose a low snarl as yin winds were swept up around it, and countless arcs of lightning began to crackle in the surrounding area. The giant ape then swelled even further in size. Its fur began to turn red and 3 twisted horns emerged from the top of its head. Its glabella split open to reveal a crimson demonic eye, and at the same time, its face elongated as it bared its mouthful of sharp fangs. 3 black bone spikes had also sprouted from its back, each of which was around 10 feet in length with black yin qi swirling around them. The white-robed ghostly woman's horror was even further exacerbated by the sight of the weeping soul beast's transformation. She suddenly let loose a long, sharp screech, sending a burst of invisible sound waves hurtling rapidly toward Han Li and the weeping soul beast. However, Han Li was already prepared for this well in advance. He laid a hand on the back of his own head, and gray light erupted forth along with 5 colored flames, shielding both himself and the weeping soul beast within. As such, Han Li managed to withstand the soundwave attack with nothing more than a slight pain in his spiritual sense. As for the weeping soul beast, it was completely unaffected. Instead, a sinister look appeared on its face, and it slowly opened the demonic eye on its glabella to shoot forth a bolt of lightning as thick as a large bowl. The bolt of lightning was as vibrant red as blood, and it is able to completely ignore the white light barrier as it instantly punctured the body of the white-robed ghostly woman, who was completely immobilized by the weeping soul beast's soul-devouring light. Letter 1D627, letter 1D45F, letter 1D452, letter 1D452, letter 1D638, letter 1D626, letter 1D624, letter 1D630, letter 1D4C2. The ghostly woman let loose a howl of anguish as the crimson arc of lightning bound her body like a spirit snake, then forcibly dragged her through the air, taking her over to the weeping soul beast in the blink of an eye. The beast opened its mouth and devoured her with any hesitation, then furrowed its brows before spitting out a black jade badge. Han Li made a grabbing motion to draw the badge into the grasp before giving it a brief inspection. This is a myriad distance talisman. Even though it was slightly different from the one used by humans, Han Li was still able to immediately identify it. A hint of surprise flashed through his eyes, and a contemplative look appeared on his face. All of a sudden, a burst of loud rumbling intermingled with a furious roar erupted from within the light formation in the distance. Han Li shuddered upon hearing this before hurriedly waving a hand toward the weeping soul beast. The latter shrank down rapidly before disappearing up Han Li's sleeve, and at the same, Han Li stomped a foot onto the ground, transforming in a mighty azure bird as he flew away like lightning. The large azure bird flew through the air as an astonishingly rapid streak of azure light, covering a distance of over 100 feet with each and every flap of its wings. As Han Li hurtled through the air in his Tian Peng form, he activated the Great Development Technique with all his might, using his powerful spiritual sense to forcibly envelop the tracking marks planted in his body by the 4 demon monarchs. However, those tracking marks were simply too powerful. Even though he had unleashed several secret techniques from the Great Development treasured scriptures and also used the Tian Peng power he attained following his transformation, he was still only able to temporarily repress those marks. It would only take around a day, and a night by his estimation before those marks would take effect again. Han Li was naturally doing this to lure the demon monarchs into thinking that he was dead, thereby making it easier for him to do what he had to do next, and that was to save Yuan Yao and Yan Li, then take them to an area with immense yin qi so they could remove the tracking marks within his body. Only then would he truly be freed from the demon monarchs. Under normal circumstances, Han Li naturally wouldn't be able to achieve this, but with the infernal lightning beast stirring up trouble for the demon monarchs, there was a chance for him. He hadn't bought the demon monarchs a lot of time, so they had most likely only just entered the Divine Pond area not too long ago. Even if they knew that this beast was on its way back, there was no way that they'd be willing to let all their prior efforts go to waste and give up on the divine infernal river elixir. After the infernal lightning beast escaped from the 9 palaces' heavenly talismans, it would return to its lair, undoubtedly in a thunderous rage, just in time to encounter the demon monarchs, and all hell would break loose then. As long as he didn't have to face any of the demon monarchs in direct battle, there was a very good chance that he'd be able to save Yuan Yao and Yan Li. With those thoughts racing through his mind, Han Li flew rapidly through the air. Just as he was about to re-enter the gray mountain ranges, a dull thump suddenly rang out from his Tian Peng body. Azure light flashed, and he reverted back to his human form. He then rustled his sleeve to produce a white jade badge that landed in his palm. There was an image of a massive nine-palace diagram carved onto the face of the Jade badge, but the badge itself had already been shattered into countless pieces. Han Li's expression changed slightly as he took a reflexive glance behind himself. He then stowed away the Jade badge before sweeping a hand over his storage bracelet, and spiritual light flashed as a purple talisman with mysterious silver runes shimmering over its surface appeared in his hand. It was none other than the High Zenith Invisibility Talisman. Han Li released the talisman without any hesitation, and it exploded in midair. Several shimmering silver runes then emerged before dancing in the air above Han Li. The runes then transformed into clouds of silver mist that instantly enshrouded his entire body. The silver mist dissipated moments later, and Han Li had completely disappeared. Having attained an insubstantial body, Han Li slowly drifted downward before hiding at the foot of a massive tree, then looking up at the sky with rapt focus. After a long while, a rumbling thunderclap finally erupted in the distant sky. Moments later, lightning flashed overhead, and the infernal lightning beast sped past with arcs of silver lightning revolving around its body, having completely failed to detect Han Li's presence down below. Following a few flashes, the infernal lightning beast disappeared into the distance. Han Li's eyes flashed, and he remained hidden beneath the tree. After about 7 or 8 more minutes, he felt that enough time had passed, and only then did he slowly re-emerge within a flash of silver light. Several silver runes flew out of his body, then combined together to form a purple talisman again. Letter 1D65B, letter 1D493, letter 1D486, letter 1D65A, letter 1D498, letter 1D486, letter 1D484, letter 1D490, letter 1D4F6. Han Li waved a hand through the air, and the talisman disappeared up his sleeve as a streak of purple light. Immediately thereafter, he sped into the distance as a streak of azure light, traveling along the exact same route that the infernal lightning beast had just taken. Not long after that, Han Li arrived back at the black light barrier from which he'd originally set off. The azure light around him faded, and he hovered in midair to survey the situation down below, upon which his expression changed slightly. There was an acrid smoky scent in the air, and thousands of sets of ghostly remains littered the ground below, large patches of which had been charred black. It seemed that this place had been ravaged by lightning, and there were yin winds surging through the air, as well as residual fluctuations from an extremely powerful restriction. It seemed that a restriction had been forcibly destroyed after it had only been set up halfway. A hint of surprise and bewilderment flashed through his eyes upon seeing this. He was naturally unaware of the fact that the crimson-armored puppet and its subordinates had arrived at this place following his departure. After the weeping soul beast had devoured the white-robed ghostly woman, these ghostly beings were completely unaware that the infernal lightning beast was already on its way back. As such, they had no time to take evasive measures and were naturally destroyed by the infuriated beast. If the crimson-armored puppet were to learn of the fact that all of its subordinates outside had been killed, it would definitely fly into a thunderous rage. If the white-robed ghostly woman had used the myriad distance talisman to inform everyone of the infernal lightning beast's return, then all of the ghostly beings could hide until the beast had passed through before continuing to set up their formation. That was why the puppet had asked its subordinates to deploy a high-grade ghostly being to track Han Li and the infernal lightning beast, but never would it have thought that Han Li would completely ruin its plans. Han Li circled around in the air at low altitudes and didn't discover any living ghostly beings in the nearby area. He didn't know whether they'd all been destroyed by the infernal lightning beast or if the survivors had all fled the scene. However, he didn't delve any further into this issue before turning his gaze toward the shimmering blue passageway, and he began to stroke his chin with a contemplative look on his face. All of a sudden, he rustled a sleeve to hurl forth a stack of silver talismans, and it was another set of 9 palaces' heavenly talismans. Due to how difficult these talismans were to refine, Han Li only had 2 sets in total. He had already used 1 set, so this was naturally his final set. Han Li made a hand seal and cast a series of incantation seals onto the stack of talismans. An incredible scene ensued. The silver talismans rushed into the passageway at Han Li's behest, then disappeared into thin air. It seemed that Han Li had unleashed some kind of secret technique to conceal these talismans. Han Li withdrew his hand seal before blue light flashed through his eyes as he assessed the locations where these talismans had been concealed, and he nodded with a pleased expression in response to what he saw. A thought then occurred to him, and he flipped a palm over to produce 2 more silver talismans. However, these talismans were much different compared to the 9 palaces' heavenly talismans. There weren't any runes flashing on those talismans, but there was a faint humanoid figure inscribed onto each talisman. The facial features of both humanoid figures were quite indistinct, but the suits of golden armor they were wearing were quite clearly depicted. One of the humanoid figures was wielding a golden spear, while the one on the other talisman held twin sabers in its hands. What was strange was that these two humanoid figures were moving around on the talismans and brandishing their weapons from time to time, as if they were alive. As soon as Han Li summoned these two talismans, he rubbed his hands together. The talismans exploded amid 2 dull thumps and a flash of silver light. 2 golden projections emerged within the silver light, then hurtled downward and disappeared into the ground, merging with Han Li's shadow. Han Li wasn't hovering very high up in the sky, but his shadow on the ground was still extremely faint. Even so, the 2 golden projections were still able to conceal themselves into his shadow without a trace. These were none other than the armor origin talismans that Han Li had refined according to the method recorded on that half-page of the Golden Jade tome. He had only refined 3 of these talismans in total, yet he was using up 2 of them here, thereby providing a sufficient indication of how seriously he was taking this operation. It was no wonder that this was the case. After all of the beings within the black light barrier were fearsome beings at or above the body integration stage. He wouldn't even be able to take on any single one of them, so he had to prepare as thoroughly as he could. After using up 2 of his armor origin talismans, Han Li still wasn't satisfied. He opened his mouth to expel a ball of silver flames, which then transformed into the spirit engulfing fire raven. He then raised a hand to produce a dozen or so azure lightning beads, all of which were swallowed by the bird. Immediately thereafter, the fire raven flew up onto a massive tree nearby before concealing itself from view. After doing all that, Han Li exhaled to compose himself before he raised his hand to summon the high zenith invisibility talisman again. The talisman exploded, and his body took on an insubstantial form as he hovered soundlessly into the blue passageway. After passing through the black light barrier, Han Li surveyed his surroundings, and he immediately furrowed his brows. The area around him was extremely dark, and there were only a few azure rocks situated an indeterminate distance away that were glowing with a faint light, making Han Li feel as if he'd returned to the Umbra realm again. However, with his spirit eyes, the darkness naturally didn't faze him. Han Li narrowed his eyes slightly, and everything around him became clear as day. The surrounding area seemed to be extremely bleak and desolate, with nothing on the ground aside from a few rocks of different sizes. There weren't even any tall trees around, and the occasional patches of plant life he could see were all shot bushes and scrubs. Han Li inhaled a few times to find that the spiritual qi in the surrounding area was quite abundant and rich, which made the scenes around him rather perplexing. However, he didn't remain in this place to ponder the situation for too long. Instead, he continued onward, venturing deeper into this unknown land. Even though he didn't know where this so-called divine pond was, it certainly couldn't be wrong for him to head toward the center of the restriction. Even after adopting an insubstantial body, Han Li was still traveling quite quickly, covering a distance of close to 10 kilometers in the blink of an eye. Han Li's eyes then immediately lit up as he discovered a palace-like building in the distance. The building was only several hundred feet tall and appeared to have been constructed using ordinary rugged stone blocks. It was the first noteworthy landmark he'd come across, and it indicated that he was heading in the right direction. Thus, Han Li immediately flew toward the palace. The entrance of the palace was a tall and rectangular one that was over 100 feet tall, and a black stone gate had been completely opened outward. Han Li reflexively swept his spiritual sense toward the gate, upon which a peculiar look appeared in his eyes, and he paused on the spot. There were a couple of bursts of powerful yin qi situated on either side of the gate, indicating that there seemed to be a high-grade ghostly being concealed on each side of the entrance. Han Li was slightly surprised to make this discovery, but he was quickly enlightened as he thought of the thousands of ghostly beings that had been destroyed back at the entrance of the blue passageway. However, Han Li didn't want any unforeseen elements affecting his plans, so a hint of killing intent welled up in his heart as he injected his spiritual sense into his spirit beast bracelet. Following a loud ape cry, a streak of black light surged through the air, heading for one side of the entrance while revealed himself and pounced toward the other side. Who goes there?" 2 cries of surprise erupted from either side of the palace's entrance. Gusts of yin winds were swept up from one end, following which a massive two-headed skeleton appeared. On the other side, the pungent odor of blood and gore wafted through the air as a white-furred zombie with a pair of crimson eyes emerged. The zombie had a pair of green wings on its back that were extremely rank and putrid. Black light flashed, and a giant ape appeared. It then immediately let loose a cold harumph, blasting a burst of yellow light out of its nostrils toward the two-headed skeleton. A burst of eerie cackling rang out from the skeleton's mouth as its arms blurred through the air, creating countless claw projections. This high-grade ghostly being was clearly very confident in its body and wanted to tear the soul-devouring light apart with its bare hands, rather than fleeing the scene like the white-robed ghostly woman had. As soon as the two made contact with one another, the claw projections were immediately vanquished by the yellow light, which then surged onward to sweep up the skeleton's bony claws. Yellow light flashed, and the two-headed skeleton let loose a howl of anguish as its bone claws disintegrated into clouds of black mist. The skeleton was shocked by this turn of events, and it hurriedly attempted to hurtle back in retreat, but it was too late. The yellow light continued onward, sweeping up the skeleton's entire body, transforming it into a dense cloud of black mist that was then sucked into the weeping soul beast's mouth. The beast then let loose a cry of elation before turning to appraise Han Li, just in time to see Han Li hovering above the white-furred zombie while pointing a finger toward the divine essence-effused mountain. The mountain had expanded to over 100 feet in size, and it had trapped the ghostly being down below. Meanwhile, two golden-armored projections had appeared, and both of them were in the process of withdrawing their weapons from the zombie's body. One of them was wielding a spear with arcs of golden lightning surging along its entire length, and the spear had punctured the zombie's heart, creating a charred wound. As for the dual sabers, they had been withdrawn from the zombie's back, following which a layer of white light flashed, and the zombie's repugnant wings were sealed in translucent glacial ice. Han Li didn't spur on the two projections to kill this ghostly being. Instead, he indicated for the Weeping Soul Beast to do the honors. The Weeping Soul Beast faltered slightly before immediately springing through the air with an elated expression, quickly landing beside Han Li. It unleashed its soul-devouring light from its nostrils again, reducing this zombie into yin qi as well before devouring it, then thumping its chest with glee. These two were both powerful ghostly beings that had been cultivating within the infernal river for countless years, so they were most definitely rare delicacies for the Weeping Soul Beast. Han Li smiled at the sight of the ecstatic Weeping Soul Beast, and a plan suddenly began to hatch in his mind. He carefully appraised the Weeping Soul Beast before issuing some instructions. The Weeping Soul Beast listened with wide eyes before nodding emphatically. Black light flashed from its entire body, and it transformed into a demon beast with a single horn on its head and arcs of lightning revolving around its limbs. It was a spitting image of the infernal lightning beast that had almost hunted down Han Li earlier, except it was slightly smaller in size. Han Li nodded with a pleased smile upon seeing this before waving a hand toward the infernal lightning beast, and it shrank down to only several inches in size before disappearing up his sleeve. He then brought out his high zenith invisibility talisman again to conceal himself, then entered through the palace gates. The palace consisted of a main hall with a smaller hall on the side, and Han Li went directly into the larger main hall. The interior of the hall was very clean, and it was completely empty aside from a dozen or so thick stone pillars. However, Han Li paid no heed to all of this as his attention had been completely drawn to a small hole that was shimmering with white light at the center of the hall. He slowly made his way over to this hole, then peered into it to discover that it was a smooth round tunnel that led downward on a slanted angle, and there were no stairs or rungs to be seen. Furthermore, Han Li could only see a vast expanse of faint white light within the tunnel, thereby preventing him from seeing what lay at the bottom. After a brief moment of contemplation, Han Li slowly drifted down this tunnel. Along the way, he discovered that this tunnel was extremely deep. Even after descending for over 10,000 feet, there was still no end in sight. However, there were gusts of cold winds blowing toward him from down below, so there was clearly some kind of ventilated place at the conclusion of the tunnel. After descending for several thousand more feet, Han Li's expression changed slightly as he could hear the indistinct sounds of thunderclaps and beastie roars, as well as the occasional earth-shattering boom that made the stone walls of the tunnel around him tremor and quake. Han Li began to slow down in his descent, while releasing his spiritual sense to survey the situation up ahead. Moments later, a film of piercing white light appeared down below, and he had reached the exit. After sweeping through the area with his spiritual sense, he found that there was nothing lurking down there. He was reassured by this discovery and landed soundlessly onto the ground below, then quickly passed through the white film of light. On the other side, he found himself in another massive hall that was several times larger than the one above it, and also vastly more lavish in its construction as well. Letter 1D627, letter 1D45F, letter 1D452, letter 1D452, letter 1D638, letter 1D626, letter 1D624, letter 1D630, letter 1D4C2. Not only was the floor paved with flawless white jade, there were gems the size of large bowls embedded onto the walls and ceiling of the hall. These gems shimmered with a gentle white light that illuminated the entire hall. The spiritual chi in this area was also a lot more abundant than that of area up above, and there were spirit herbs and spirit flowers of all types of different colors growing in 2 miniature flower gardens on either side of the hall. All of the plants were extremely vibrant and shimmering with faint spiritual light, clearly having been nurtured here for countless years. However, Han Li merely looked away with a disinterested furrow of his brows. He was immediately able to identify that even though these plants were quite rare, they were mostly renowned for their beauty and aesthetic appeal rather than any practical applications. However, Han Li was only able to see most of the hall as a small portion of it was currently enshrouded in dense blood mist and arcs of lightning that were flashing violently. Clumps of blood mist and lightning intertwined with one another at low altitudes over a certain section of the hall, tumbling and exploding incessantly as they fought for dominance. However, it was quite clear that the arcs of lightning were far more powerful than the blood mist. If it weren't for the fact that there were countless green threads and gusts of yin winds whizzing through the mist to reinforce it, it would have most likely have been vanquished by the arcs of lightning already. Even so, fist-sized balls of lightning were still being manifested amid rumbling thunderclaps, then exploding to tear through large swaths of blood mist, thereby placing it firmly on the back foot. Blood mist completely obstructed Han Li's vision, but it was most likely the case that it had been conjured up by Dai Zhu in conjunction with the other demon monarchs. Amid the flashes of lightning, Han Li could indistinctly make out the silhouettes of 2 single-horned beasts, both of which were roaring with fury. There were 2 infernal lightning beasts unleashing a relentless barrage of fearsome attacks, so it was no wonder that the demon monarchs were severely on the back foot. Han Li was quite stunned by this observation, and after spectating the battle for a while, he turned his gaze downward, upon which his pupils abruptly contracted. Directly down below the vast expanse of blood mist was a green pond that was several tens of feet in size. There was white mist as well as rich spiritual chi swirling around the pond, and there was also an indistinct layer of crimson light over the surface of the water as well. Is that the divine infernal river elixir? Han Li made his way over to the pond, but he didn't pause to examine it for too long. Instead, he continued to survey his surroundings as if he were searching for something. All of a sudden, his eyes lit up as he caught sight of the motionless Yuan Yao and Yan Li standing in an obscure corner of the palace. Both of them wore stiff wooden expressions, seemingly completely unmoved by the intense battle taking place nearby. Han Li had witnessed the restrictions being cast on these 2 women, so he knew that their consciousness were still intact, but they were unable to control their bodies at all. He was relatively confident in his ability to break restrictions of this nature. After taking a glance at the intense battle that was raging within the palace, Han Li repressed elation in his heart before carefully turning his attention to other sections of the hall. He had not forgotten about the ghostly beings that he'd encountered on his way here, and there were definitely other high-grade ghostly beings that had snuck into this place as well. He didn't want to save Yuan Yao and Yan Li, only to be ambushed by those troublesome beings. Prior to discovering the locations of those hidden ghostly beings, it would be very unwise to set his plan into motion. Thus, he released his spiritual sense toward every section of the hall aside from the one where the battle was taking place, but didn't discover anything amiss. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly, and after a brief moment of contemplation, a hint of faint blue light flashed through his eyes. This place was fraught with peril, so he naturally didn't dare to unleash his spirit eyes to their full extent. He merely drew on as little spiritual power as possible to activate this ability before rapidly sweeping his gaze around the entire hall. As a result, he was finally able to discover something. In the corner of the palace furthest away from where the battle was taking place, there was a cloud of faint green chi hovering in the air. Even looking at it using his spirit eyes, the cloud of green chi was still extremely faint, as if it were completely transparent. Was that the ghostly being that had infiltrated this place? Han Li contemplated his situation momentarily before deciding to take a risk. A sharp burst of blue light erupted from his eyes as he attempted to glean the true appearance of this unknown being. As a result, he saw a crystal ball-like object hovering at the center of the cloud of green chi, and it was slowly rotating on the spot. In the instant that Han Li caught sight of that object, it immediately stopped rotating, and a wisp of green light appeared over its surface before disappearing in a flash. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon seeing this, and the blue light in his eyes was instantly snuffed out. He could sense that the bead seemed to have detected his gaze in the instant that he caught sight of it, but he was confident that he'd reacted quickly enough to avoid exposing his location. Even if that bead possessed a powerful enough spiritual sense to detect his presence, it wouldn't dare to release its spiritual sense with such reckless abandon to search for him. If it released too little of its spiritual sense, there was no way that it'd be able to bypass the high zenith invisibility talisman's concealment effect. But if too much of its spiritual sense was released, then it would immediately be detected by the demon monarchs and infernal lightning beasts. Han Li was sure that this ghostly being definitely wouldn't engage in such a reckless endeavor. Moments later, a burst of relatively feeble spiritual sense swept over the spot where he was standing, but it completely failed to detect his presence as it continued onward. Han Li heaved an internal sigh of relief in response. However, before he had a chance to consider how he was going to take Yuan Yao and Yan Li away from here without blowing his cover, a thunderous roar suddenly erupted from within the blood mist in the hall, and the battle took a drastic turn. The blood mist tumbled and surged as brilliant purple light erupted, following which a silhouette began to rapidly expand within the mist. In the blink of an eye, the purple blood puppet emerged from the mist, having already reached over 200 feet tall, and it was still swelling in size with reckless abandon. One of the crimson-robed figures was also standing atop one of the puppet's shoulders, with his hands clasped behind his back. As soon as the massive puppet emerged, crimson light flashed through its 6 eyes, and it abruptly made a grabbing motion to summon a huge crimson axe into his grasp, then swung it through the air with devastating force. The massive axe came crashing down like a small mountain, and even before it had even struck anything, gusts of ferocious winds had been swept upon around it. The silver arcs of lightning down below all tremored violently as a result, looking as if they were going to split apart. A beastly roar erupted from within the lightning, and the arcs of lightning suddenly intertwined with one another as if they had sprung to life. They converged to form a silver lightning sword amid a series of rumbling thunderclaps, then pierced straight up into the air. An earth-shattering boom erupted as the lightning sword struck the blade of the axe, upon which both of them shattered and disappeared into nothingness. Lightning then flashed once again, as several azure claw projections that were each around 10 feet in length peered before hurtling directly toward the purple-blood puppet. The crimson-robed figure standing atop the puppet's shoulder harumphed coldly upon seeing this. He opened his mouth to expel a mouthful of blood essence, then made a grabbing motion before swinging his arm through the air. The ball of blood essence transformed into a crimson spear and hurtled through the air at his behest. The crimson spear pierced through several claw projections in the blink of an eye, and was just about to disappear into the lightning down below when silver light suddenly flashed, and a projection of an infernal lightning beast's head that had been expanded to several times its actual size emerged from within the lightning. The projection opened its mouth to devour the crimson spear, then blasted forth an extremely thick arc of lightning in retaliation. The bolt of lightning transformed into a silver worm mid-flight, but right at this moment, crimson light flashed within the purple-blood puppet's eyes, following which 2 streaks of crimson light shot forth, striking the lightning worm with unerring accuracy. Both the lightning and streaks of crimson light clashed and disappeared in unison. Following their first lightning-fast exchange, the purple-blood puppet and the crimson-robed figure appeared to be evenly matched with the infernal lightning beast. However, countless green threads suddenly shot forth from the blood mist in the air, instantly converging toward a single spot amid a flash of green light to form a slender humanoid figure standing atop a golden flower. It was none other than Mu Qing. At the same time, fierce yin winds swept up nearby, and the white-haired beauty also appeared. Both of them wore grave expressions as they scrutinized the projection of the beastly head before them, with intense, unblinking eyes. A ferocious look appeared on the projection's face upon seeing this, following which lightning flashed violently down below, and another similar projection appeared, except this one was slightly smaller, and the horn on its head was a little thinner than that of the first projection. The white-haired beauty's expression darkened even further at the sight of the two infernal lightning beast head projections, and she murmured, "To think that there were two infernal lightning beasts here. It had always been a mystery to me how fellow Taoist Jew had fallen here, but everything makes sense now. What's the point of thinking about such things at a time like this? The divine elixir here is connected to the spirit vein in this place, so we have to buy Liu Zhu more time for him to sever this connection and secure the elixir. The three of us have no choice but to risk our lives here," the crimson-robed figure harumphed coldly, seemingly in a rather foul mood. Mu Qing and the white-haired beauty glanced at one another upon seeing this. The crimson-robed figure's attitude wasn't all that strange. After all, any one of them would be absolutely furious if their avatar had been destroyed under inexplicable circumstances. "Fellow Taoist Daizu, it's been a long time since your avatar was destroyed outside, and that happened before the second infernal lightning beat returned, so there must be a third party involved. They've either remained outside to ambush us as soon as we leave or they've entered this place as well. Perhaps they're right here in this hall, spectating our battle against these two infernal lightning beasts," Mu Qing said with a cold light in her eyes. "So what if that's the case? We're too busy fending off these two beasts to worry about anything else. Speaking of which, I've been unable to detect the tracking mark I planted in Han Brat's body this entire time, so it looks like he really was killed by the other infernal lightning beast. That's a real shame," the white-haired beauty sighed. "For the infernal lightning beast to return so quickly indicates that Han Brat is most definitely dead, so there's no point in thinking about him now. Our main priority is to take care of these two infernal lightning beasts. Even though they're not very intelligent, their lightning attribute powers are extremely troublesome for us to deal with. Only fellow Taoist Liu Zhu among us isn't susceptible to the powers of lightning, but he's also the only one who can sever the spirit vein, so we can only hold on to the best of our abilities here. As for the ones that killed my avatar outside, they've been too scared to reveal themselves even after all this time, so they're clearly not powerful enough for us to worry about. All we have to do is be a little more cautious so we don't get struck by any sneak attacks from those cowards," the crimson-robed figure said in a cold voice. All of a sudden, one of the beastly head projections before them suddenly swelled dramatically in size before opening its cavernous mouth and hurtling toward the three demon monarchs. Meanwhile, the other projection lowered its head, and dazzling light flashed from its single horn as it blasted several thick bolts of lightning toward the trio. At the same time, the two infernal lightning beasts down below were summoning their powers of lightning to create more balls of silver lightning, before hurling them toward the blood mist in a frenzy. The white-haired beauties darkened as a massive ghostly projection with a head of disheveled hair appeared behind her. Gusts of violent gray yin winds erupted from the projection's mouth, while countless azure threads shot forth from Mu Qing's body. Neither of them dared to grow complacent in this perilous situation. As for the crimson-robed figure, he merely stood still on the spot, but the purple-blood puppet beneath his feet had opened all 6 of its eyes as wide as it could to blast forth 6 pillars of crimson light. At the same time, the blood mist down below tumbled and surged violently, sweeping toward the balls of lightning in retaliation. Thus, the fierce battle between the 3 demon monarchs and the 2 infernal lightning beasts continued. Tumbling blood mist and powerful flashes of lightning instantly inundated the 3 demon monarchs again, while Han Li stood near the entrance of the hall with his brows tightly furrowed. Without that cloud-green chi lurking in that corner, everything would be quite simple. All he had to do was rush in when the demon monarchs and infernal lightning beasts were completely absorbed in their battles, then rescue the 2 women before making his escape. All of the demon monarchs clearly held the divine infernal river elixir in extremely high regard, so it was very unlikely that they'd risk jeopardizing all their plans by coming after him. However, with that mysterious cloud of green chi hanging there, Han Li's main concern was that it would step in as soon as he sprang into action. In that case, he would be in deep trouble. Han Li didn't want to take such a risk, so his mind was rapidly scrambling for a viable alternative. As time slowly passed, the infernal lightning beast and demon monarchs began to unleash more and more of their abilities, and the battle had become extremely intense. The 2 infernal lightning beasts seemed to be aware that the demon monarchs were only buying time for Liu Zhu, so the longer the battle dragged on for, the more violent and frustrated they became. As such, their attacks were also growing more powerful, and every single bolt of lightning erupting from their horns had become several times thicker than they were during the initial phase of the battle. With every blast of lightning, one of the demon monarchs was sure to be forced back a few steps, and it was quite clear that the two beasts held a significant upper hand. However, it was still an extremely difficult task for them to defeat the demon monarchs and evict them from this place in a short time. And Li surveyed the situation through narrowed eyes before slowly drifting through the air. Regardless of what happened, he had to get closer to Yuan Yao and Yan Li first. As for what happened after that, he would just have to adapt as the situation continued to unfold. In any case, he had to save these two women. In order to avoid blowing his cover, Han Li was naturally moving very slowly. All of the beings within the hall far outstripped him in terms of cultivation base, and even after using his high zenith invisibility talisman, there was still a very high chance that he could be discovered if a body integration stage being were to focus their spiritual directly toward his general vicinity. Thankfully, the demon monarchs and infernal lightning beasts were far too busy engaged in battle to be searching through the hall with their spiritual sense. Thus, Han Li was finally able to land beside the two women after skirting around the battle taking place within the hall, and he heaved a long sigh of relief before immediately turning his attention to Yuan Yao. At such close quarters, Han Li was able to identify that there was a series of barely visible crimson lines running along the delicate skin on her face. These crimson lines were as thin as strands of hair, and without his spirit eyes to further enhance his vision, he wouldn't even have been able to see them despite how close he was standing to the two women. Han Li's brows furrowed upon seeing this. These two women had been restricted through the use of some kind of strange blood talismans, and it was quite clear that this was a type of extremely potent evil technique, so both his divine devil-bane lightning and spirit-engulfing heavenly flames would most likely be quite effective here. However, he had stationed his spirit-engulfing fire raven at the entrance, so his divine devil-bane lightning was the only tool available to him to lift this restriction. Of course, this wasn't a good time to strike. If he were to break this restriction now, his cover would immediately be blown, and he couldn't afford for that to happen at this point. With that in mind, Han Li withdrew his gaze before turning his attention toward the cloud of green qi. This thing definitely had something to do with those ghostly beings outside, and Han Li didn't believe for a single instant that it was merely a neutral bystander. This was most definitely not the right time to strike, so he could only engage this mysterious in a contest of patience. As these thoughts flashed rapidly through Han Li's mind, he quickly decided to take a conservative approach. Furthermore, the most important factor to be taken into consideration here was that the most powerful being among the Earth Abyss demon monarchs, Liu Zhu, was still nowhere to be seen. Prior to ascertaining Liu Zhu's location, Han Li definitely wouldn't dare to take any reckless risks. Thus, Han Li turned away from the cloud of green qi and fixed his gaze on the strange pond in the hall, wondering if Liu Zhu was situated deep within this pond. After all, this pond was the only place that anyone could hide within this palace. Unfortunately, the mist hovering around the pond was capable of cutting off one's spiritual sense, so Han Li was unable to glean the situation within the pond. He could only sense that the white mist was imbued with abundant spiritual qi, the purity of which he had never seen before. He felt as if just inhaling a lungful of this mist would save him several days of arduous cultivation. This was why Han Li immediately determined that the water in this pond was the so-called divine infernal river elixir. Han Li was initially quite perplexed, wondering why the demon monarchs didn't simply scoop up the elixir in the pond before running away. After all, despite how powerful the two infernal lightning beasts, there was no way that they'd be able to keep the demon monarchs from securing the divine elixir, particularly when they were situated directly over the pond. However, Han Li quickly understood why this was the case after a brief moment of contemplation. The pond either had some powerful restrictions set up around it that even the demon monarchs were wary of, or some other prerequisite had to be satisfied before they could try to secure the elixir. Perhaps Liu Zhu's absence had something to do with this. With that in mind, Han Li was even more intent on waiting for the situation to unfold further. Thus, he stood still beside the two women, waiting for the outcome of the battle above the green pond, or for the cloud of green qi to finally do something. Even though he couldn't repress the tracking marks in his body for too long, it was quite apparent from the intensity of the battle raging within the hall that it wasn't going to be a prolonged one, either. An opportunity could present itself at any moment. Sure enough, after a short while, the two infernal lightning beasts had finally lost their patience and begun to truly attack with all their might. The mist around the green pond down below surged, and a burst of pure spiritual chi seeped forth while the nearby ground began to tremor. The two infernal lightning beasts exchanged a glance to see their own expressions of shock and fury mirrored in each other's eyes. The two beasts let loose a collective thunderous roar, following which the arcs of lightning revolving around their bodies faded, and they rose up onto their hind legs like a pair of bipedal beings. Gusts of pitch-black winds appeared in the surrounding area, revolving around the two beasts and inundating both of their bodies. The three demon monarchs' hearts jolted upon seeing this. With their extensive battle experience, they knew that nothing good could possibly happen next. These two infernal lightning beasts were clearly preparing to unleash some kind of powerful ability. Thus, the white-haired beauty immediately let loose a low cry, and her head of white locks suddenly grew to incredible lengths before she whipped her hair through the air. Countless streaks of white light shot forth to enshroud the gusts of black winds. These streaks of white light were as straight as arrows, and they appeared to possess immense penetrative power. Meanwhile, Mu Qing made a hand seal, and brilliant azure light erupted from her body. Projections of flowers appeared all around her before blurring and transforming into wheels of all types of different colors. The edges of these wheels were extraordinarily thin, and they shot forth soundlessly through the air along with the streaks of white light, creating quite a harrowing sight to behold. However, an unexpected scene then ensued. The two beasts did nothing to prepare themselves from the oncoming attack, simply allowing them to strike the black winds surging around their bodies. However, a sharp screeching sound akin to that of metal grating on metal then erupted, and all of the attacks were repelled as if they'd struck an indestructible wall. The two women both faltered upon seeing this. Right at this moment, the black winds dissipated to reveal a pair of sinister humanoid demon beasts that were each around 100 feet tall. The two demon beasts each had a single horn on their heads, as well as silver scales all over their bodies, indicating that they were still the same infernal lightning beasts. However, the shape of their limbs and bodies very closely resembled those of a human. What was even more unsettling to the three demon monarchs was that as soon as the two beasts emerged in this humanoid form of theirs, they immediately began to make hand seals while each expelling an object out of their mouths. One of them was a small black flag that was flashing with black light, while the other was an intricate disc that was emanating brilliant white light. The crimson-robed figure was the first to realize what they were up to, and he hurriedly yelled, "Stop them! They're trying to activate the restriction left behind by the mayfly race." He then immediately swept his sleeves through the air to hurl forth a pair of short swords that were only several inches in length each, which flew toward the two treasures summoned by the infernal lightning beasts as two streaks of crimson light. However, the infernal lightning beasts seemed to have anticipated such an attack, and they both shook their heads in unison, upon which their horns detached themselves before transforming into two bolts of lightning. The bolts of lightning manifested from the two horns clashed with the streaks of crimson light amid two resounding booms, and the immense powers of lightning instantly pulverized the two short swords with devastating might. These horns were the hardest body parts of these two beasts, and they'd been refined for countless years, so it was no wonder that they were able to destroy the crimson-robed figure's spirit sword so easily. However, the two horns weren't done just yet. Both of them disappeared on the spot before reappearing several tens of feet in front of the crimson-robed figure amid a loud thunderclap, then hurtling forth at an astonishing speed. The two infernal lightning beasts seemed to have identified that the crimson-robed figure was the weakest of the three, so they decided to combine their powers to kill him first. The crimson-robed figure's heart jolted with shock, but the two horns flying toward him were too fast for him to evade. As such, he could only conjure a layer of crimson light around his body, which then shot forth as a pair of crimson shadows to shield him. These were none other than the blood puppets he'd refined. Immediately thereafter, his long robes bulged as a crimson light barrier surfaced over his body. The two blood puppets were quite powerful, but the two horns suddenly merged as one, forming a sharp lightning spike that punctured the two puppets' bodies with ease before continuing on toward the crimson-robed figure. The crimson light barrier only managed to stall the lightning spike for a split second before the former was punctured, as if it were nothing more than a papier-mâché structure. An earth-shattering boom erupted as a gaping wound, as wide as a large bowl, appeared on the crimson-robed figure's chest. The crimson-robed figure rapidly slammed his palms all over his own body, plastering a dozen or so crimson talismans to himself in one fell swoop. A peculiar scene then ensued. Not only was the gaping wound on his chest not shedding so much as a single drop of blood, the flesh around the edges of the wound squirmed in a grotesque manner before regenerating at a rate that was discernible to the naked eye. Mu Qing and the white-haired beauty's expressions eased upon seeing this. If the crimson-robed figure really were killed in a moment of complacency, then the two of them wouldn't be able to last very long at all against these two infernal lightning beasts. However, right at this moment, the lightning spike suddenly circled around in a flash, aiming for the crimson-robed figure's head on this occasion. Before Mu Qing and the white-haired woman had a chance to intercept, a giant purple palm hurtled through the air, moving at an astonishing speed that completely belied its massive size. The hand streaked through the air like an illusionary blur, before catching the lightning spike in a vice-like grip. However, a loud thunderclap suddenly erupted within the massive hand in the next instant, and countless arcs of lightning erupted from the lightning spike as it squirmed through the fingers on the huge hand like a silver snake. Following a few flashes, the lightning spike returned to the infernal lightning beasts, where it split into two again before reattaching themselves onto the heads of the two beasts as their horns. The two horns were still shimmering with silver light, having remained completely unscathed in the aftermath of that intense clash. During this brief delay, the two beasts had managed to activate the treasures hovering before them, and they opened their mouths in unison to expel mouthfuls of blood essence onto the pair of treasures. Black and white light flashed respectively from the flag and the disc, completely absorbing all of the blood mist down below. The flag then transformed into a dark cloud that rose up into the air, disappearing into the ceiling of the palace in a flash. Meanwhile, the disc transformed into a streak of white chi that plummeted and disappeared into the ground. Mu Qing and the white-haired beauty's hearts jolted with shock, yet before they had a chance to do anything, brilliant spiritual light suddenly erupted from the ceiling of the palace, following which a series of black patterns emerged. Those patterns rapidly spread along the ceiling before combining to form a massive formation. Black light was flashing all over the formation, and there was a black hole at the very center, within which violent winds were howling incessantly. It was as if a passageway into another space had been forced open. At the same time, scintillating white light erupted from the ground as a series of fist-sized runes appeared. In the very instant that those runes emerged, a massive golden light formation appeared within the green pond amid the tumbling mist. As soon as this light formation appeared, it enshrouded the entire pond beneath it, and it was shimmering with piercing golden light that forced one to shield their eyes. Mu Qing and the white-haired beauty were both shocked and infuriated upon seeing this. They had enough belief in Liu Zu's abilities to know that he wouldn't actually be trapped in the pond by this golden formation, but with this formation acting as an obstacle, it was clearly extremely unlikely that they'd be able to secure the divine elixir in a short time. What was even more troublesome was that the black light formation overhead was still expanding rapidly, quickly encompassing all of the demon monarchs down below. It then slowly detached itself from the ceiling and descended at the behest of the two infernal lightning beasts. As such, they'd either have to take evasive measures, thereby forcing them away from the green pond, or face the power of this restriction. Just as Mu Qing was hesitating about how to proceed, the voice of the white-haired beauty suddenly sounded in her ears. "Fellow Taoist Mu, let's join forces to break this formation. Brother Dai Zhu, please cover us." After a brief hesitation, she nodded in response. This appeared to be the only feasible course of action. At the same time, the crimson-robed figure had also heard the same voice transmission. At this moment, the gaping hole on his chest, which would have been lethal to a normal person, was already almost completely healed, and aside from the fact that the light in his eyes had dulled slightly, the wound didn't appear to have affected him much. He furrowed his brows upon hearing the white-haired beauty's proposal, then cast his gaze toward the purple-blood puppet's massive hand, which it had used to catch the lightning spike earlier. The entire palm of the hand had been charred black, and there was an acrid burnt smell emanating from it. The crimson-robed figure heaved a long sigh before also slowly nodding his head. He then abruptly stomped a foot onto the purple-blood puppet's shoulder, then reached a hand up his sleeve before tossing out a wooden box that was golden in color. He began to chant something while pointing at the box, and its lid flew off as 7 streaks of light of different colors erupted from within. The streaks of light faded to reveal 7 puppets of different forms. Some of them were in the form of demon beasts, some resembled flying spirit race, some were a mix between human and demon, and there were even 2 insect puppets. One of those was a massive worm, while the other was a giant ant. All 7 of these puppets had been refined from metallic materials, and their bodies were covered in runes. They had quite clearly been painstakingly crafted by Dai Zhu with great care and effort. The white-haired beauty chuckled upon seeing this, and she rotated on the spot as 8 bursts of black chi flew forth from her body, within each of which there was a blurry humanoid figure clad in black armor. These were none other than the yin armor ghost monarchs that the white-haired beauty had stored away for recovery and recuperation. As soon as these ghost monarchs appeared, they immediately sat down in a cross-legged manner around the white-haired beauty. Inky black yin chi emanated from their bodies, forming a massive black cloud around an acre in area in the blink of an eye. On the other side, Mu Qing's skin had turned completely green, and she made a hand seal as countless azure threads surfaced around her. Patches of strange and exotic plants then instantly appeared in the surrounding area with her, at the very center. Meanwhile, the 2 infernal lightning beasts paid no heed at all to what the 3 demon monarchs were doing. They merely maintained their hand seals as spiritual light flashed all over their bodies, injecting their power into the formation overhead in a frenzy. They appeared to be extremely confident in this restriction. Seeing as the battle was finally about to be decided, Han Li's expression suddenly changed as he rustled a sleeve and tipped out a dozen or so azure beads into his hand. He then narrowed his eyes as he cast his gaze over to another corner of the hall. There, the cloud of green chi and the bead within it were finally making their move. Blue light flickered within Han Li's eyes as he looked on with rapt focus, and the bead suddenly disappeared from within the green chi right before his eyes. Even with his bright-sight spirit eyes, he was unable to track down its location. Han Li's heart jolted upon seeing this, and he hurriedly released his spiritual sense to encompass an area with a radius of several tens of feet. The last thing he wanted was for the bead to sneak up on him and unleash a surprise attack. Even though that was extremely unlikely to happen, he still had to take all the precautions he could. Han Li turned to glance at the 2 women beside him, then cast his gaze toward the fierce battle that was still taking place, and his fingers reflexively tightened around his lightning beads. Even though he'd experienced countless tumultuous twists and turns during his cultivation journey, he was still extremely tense and nervous. He knew that he would only have one chance to save these 2. If he were to fail, then this palace was going to be his final resting place, and over 1,000 years of arduous cultivation would go to waste. This feeling of teetering on a knife's edge between life and death was making Han Li's heart pound in his chest. At this moment, Mu Qing and the white-haired beauty began to attack the black spell formation. Meanwhile, the crimson-robed figure, the purple-blood puppet, and the 7 other metallic puppets he just summoned stood in front of the 2 women, acting as their guardians. A sharp, ghostly screech suddenly erupted from within the yin clouds that the white-haired beauty was situated in, following which a white bony ghost claw suddenly reached out before making a grabbing motion. Ball of egg-sized gray light erupted from between its fingers, before surging violently into the air above. As for Mu Qing, the plants that had appeared around her all disappeared into her body, and she slowly opened her mouth amid a burst of erratically flickering spiritual light to blast forth a pillar of green light. The pillar of light was of an extremely vibrant green color, yet somehow struck the onlooker with the impression that it was quite viscous, thus creating an extremely peculiar sight to behold. The 2 attacks flashed through the air, reaching the underside of the black formation in the blink of an eye. The gray balls of light expanded and shrank sporadically, while the green pillar of light struck the center of the formation in a completely soundless manner. A ferocious light flashed through the eyes of the 2 infernal lightning beasts upon seeing this, and they immediately injected more power into the black light formation up above. A loud rumbling boom erupted as a gust of black winds blew out of the center of the formation. The gust of wind was extremely fierce and as scathing as a sharp blade. Furthermore, there were specks of light shimmering within the wind, and there seemed to countless glittering particles of sand intermingled within the wind. As the gust of wind came into contact with the pillar of green light and balls of silver light, a string of resounding explosions rang out, while balls of light of different colors flashed beneath the formation. Moments later, a burst of gray and green light rose up into the air to suppress the black light formation's descent, thereby resulting in a temporary impasse. As more gusts of black winds continued to surge forth, the black particles of sand created a mass of inky blackness in the wind, slowly forcing back the gray and green light. A peculiar look flashed through Mu Qing's eyes. She flipped her hand over to produce a small section of a tree branch. The branch was no more than 3 feet in length with a few soft green leaves growing from it. Even though it had clearly been detached from the tree that it once belonged to, there was still abundant spiritual qi revolving around it, and it was showing no signs of yellowing or wilting at all. Mu Qing tossed this branch into the air, and a ball of green light blossomed. The branch transformed into an exuberant green tree in the blink of an eye with lush shimmering branches and leaves, as if the entire tree had been carved out of a block of exquisite green jade. Mu Qing wore a grave expression as she chanted something, and the tree trunk swelled drastically in size while the branches elongated. Countless leaf-shaped green projections then flew forth from the tree, all of which surged upward to fuel the assault against the black light formation. "Nicely done, fellow Taoist Mu." A cry of surprise and elation sounded from within the yin winds. "HMPH, fellow Taoist Lan, it's about time you put in some work as well. Don't tell me this is the extent of your capabilities," Mu Qing replied in a cold voice. "He," the white-haired beauty chuckled within the yin cloud, following which all 8 of the ghost monarchs let loose long howls in unison. Boundless yin qi surged toward the center and converged, with countless ghostly shadows weeping and cackling within the yin qi. Moments later, the yin cloud dissipated, and a massive figure emerged in its place. This was a gargantuan being that was around 70 to 80 feet tall, and was clad in a suit of antiquated black armor. It was wielding a huge warhammer, and the surface of the armor was covered entirely in sharp black spikes that were around a foot in length each, as well as a series of extremely profound silver patterns. As for the warhammer, it was even more peculiar in design. It was pitch black in color, just like the suit of the armor, but there were 8 white skulls embedded onto the hammer, and all of those skulls were squirming incessantly as they let loose howls of anguish, blasting forth bursts of black qi in the process, creating a harrowing sight to behold. This gigantic being was none other than an enlarged version of the white-haired beauty, and the 8 skulls on her war hammer had been manifested from the 8 yin armor ghost monarchs. Mu Qing's expression changed slightly upon seeing this, but before she had a chance to raise any questions, a cold look appeared on the white-haired beauty as she hurled her war hammer into the air before making a strange hand seal. The hammer rotated in the air, and the 8 skulls screeched in unison, expelling 8 bursts of green flames that swept directly upward. Thus, the yin flames and green leaf projections stacked on top of one another, encompassing the entire black formation up above, thereby completely halting its momentum again. However, the 2 infernal lightning beasts weren't flustered in the slightest upon seeing this. Both of them merely let loose a few sharp cries toward the air above them, upon which their bodies further expanded slightly before they raised their hands up high above their heads. Countless silver threads appeared again amid a string of thunderclaps. The silver threads rang along their arms, transforming into massive bolts of lightning that hurtled upward before disappearing into the black light formation. All of a sudden, a loud rumbling sound erupted from within the formation, and it suddenly swelled to almost twice its original size. At the same time, the sand particles within the black winds multiplied by severalfold, and the formation was able to firmly wrest back the upper hand again. The white-haired beauty and Mu Qing were stunned to see this, and they hurriedly unleashed Emro abilities. One of them expelled a mouthful of blood essence, while the other raised her head and let loose a long cry of fury. Their magic powers received a boost as a result, thereby allowing them further enhance the powers of the treasures they'd unleashed. Thus, leaf projection and yin flames were both bolstered significantly, yet the 2 demon monarchs were still unable to completely halt the formation's descent. Both of their expressions changed drastically upon seeing this. It appeared that this restriction really was too powerful for them to handle. Mu Qing took a deep breath before turning to the purple-blood puppet as she yelled, "Lend us your assistance, fellow Taoist Daizu. If this thing falls on us, we'll be in big trouble." The crimson-robed figure standing atop the purple-blood puppet didn't say anything in response, but the 7 metallic puppets he had summoned suddenly flew forth as 7 streaks of light, hurtling directly toward the 2 infernal lightning beasts. The black light formation was indeed quite powerful, but its powers would be severely hampered if the 2 beasts weren't directly controlling it. As such, the 7 puppets didn't have to engage the 2 beasts in a direct battle. All they had to do was distract the 2 beasts, thereby preventing them from being able to focus wholeheartedly on the formation. As the 7 streaks of light sped toward the 2 infernal lightning beasts, a cold light flashed through the beasts' eyes, and they switched to an alternate hand seal. All of a sudden, a massive black hole with a diameter of around 100 feet appeared behind them. The two infernal lightning beasts swayed, and their bodies instantly blurred as they vacated themselves from the area encompassed by the black hole. Immediately thereafter, a rumbling boom rang out from the center of the black hole, following which a vast expanse of black light shot forth like lightning, sweeping up all of the oncoming puppets. An astonishing turn of events then unfolded. All 7 puppets abruptly disappeared within the swath of black light, then reappeared at the right in front of the black hole before being drawn in and disappearing in a flash. The demon monarchs all drew sharp breaths upon seeing this. The 2 infernal lightning beasts let loose a few triumphant snarls before quickly making a hand seal, and the black hole blurred before also vanishing on the spot. A thunderous roar of rage immediately escaped the crimson-robed figure's mouth, clearly indicating that he had been extremely infuriated by the inexplicable loss of those 7 puppets. He immediately laid a hand on the back of his own head, and crimson chi surged forth before forming a massive crimson ball right before him. The crimson-robed figure swept an arm through the air, seemingly to attack the infernal lightning beast with this crimson ball, but right at this moment, Mu Qing abruptly turned toward a certain direction as she yelled, "Who goes there? Show yourself." Before the words had even left her mouth, she had already swept a sleeve through the air toward that direction, sending a plume of azure threads hurtling forth, striking what appeared to be empty air. A faint cry of surprise suddenly sounded, following which a ball of green chi abruptly exploded. The azure threads instantly punctured the green chi, but didn't manage to strike anything of substance. In the next instant, extremely feeble spatial fluctuations erupted in the air above Mu Qing, and a translucent bead emerged. As soon as the object appeared, it began to emanate scintillating light, forcing everyone to shield their eyes in order to avoid being blinded. A crisp crack sounded, and the bead suddenly transformed into 2 humanoid figures, one of which was white while the other was crimson. The crimson humanoid figure immediately raised a hand, sending a streak of silver light flying through the air before striking down toward Mu Qing like lightning. There was a silver chopper with a smooth mirror-like finish within the streak of silver light. It was none other than the 5-dragon chopper. As for the faint humanoid figure, it was naturally none other than the crimson-armored puppet. Due to the flash of piercing white light that had appeared overhead, Mu Qing was forced to close her eyes, but she had already released her spiritual sense, so she could clearly see everything in a radius of several tens of feet around her. As such, she was able to react in a calm manner as she pointed a finger toward the descending silver chopper. Azure light instantly flashed near the chopper, as countless azure threads appeared out of thin air before intertwining with one another. Some of them surrounded the silver chopper in a watertight barrier, while the rest of those threads formed a thin azure veil that hung above her. Mu Qing had prepared countless spirit threads of this nature prior to entering this palace in preparation for any surprise attacks that may be thrown at her, which was why she appeared to be quite well prepared. However, the 5-dragon chopper was far more powerful than she could imagine. The barrier of azure threads around the chopper was sliced through with ease before it descended onto the azure veil without any pause. The azure veil was sliced apart as if it were a papier-mâché structure, and the chopper continued to descend toward Mu Qing. Mu Qing's expression changed drastically, and only then did she realize just how dangerous this chopper was. She wanted to try and evade, but it was already too late. The chopper manifested a series of projections during its descent, all of which disappeared in a flash. Mu Qing's heart jolted upon seeing this, and she only had time to conjure up a suit of azure armor over her body before a series of massive shimmering silver appeared around her in all directions. A sharp screeching sound erupted from the surfaces of these giant blades, and bursts of frosty light emanated from them to form a watertight barricade around Mu Qing, affording her no avenues for escape nor evasion. Mu Qing's face immediately turned deathly pale upon seeing this, but she then gritted her teeth before rustling both sleeves at once, and a short black rod appeared in each of her hands. She swung these rods through the air, and mountainous staff projections instantly appeared before her, then crashed straight toward the massive blades around her. Mu Qing was well aware of the fact that she had already lost the initiative, and that if she were to stay rooted to the spot, she would definitely be killed. A rapid string of clangs rang out as the staff projections were able to smash open the frosty light, opening up an escape path for Mu Qing. However, more waves of frosty light surged forth to replenish the chink that had been inflicted by the staff projections, and it was as if there were no end to this lethal light. All of a sudden, the two black rods were sliced apart by the frosty light, and the staff projections immediately faded as a result. Mu Qing was stunned to see this, and she immediately withdrew her hands to try and unleash other abilities, only for the frosty light around her to completely inundate her body in a flash. The suit of green armor that she was wearing only managed to remain intact for a few moments before it was also sliced apart, and a howl of anguish rang out, followed by deathly silence. It appeared that Mu Qing had been killed, just like that. The white-haired beauty looked on with wide eyes, and her mouth gaped open, unable to believe what she had just witnessed. She was well aware of the fact that Mu Qing was definitely no less powerful than her, yet the crimson-armored puppet had managed to kill her in what seemed like the blink of an eye. At this moment, the puppet pointed a finger toward the frosty light, and the light converged to form the silver chopper again. Beneath the chopper, Mu Qing's body had been sliced into countless pieces, and her remains were hovering in midair. Strangely enough, the pieces of her body weren't shedding so much as a single drop of blood, as if she didn't even possess a body of flesh and blood. The crimson-armored puppet merely took a brief glance at her remains, before paying them no further heed. It had already identified that Mu Qing possessed a wood spirit body, so it wasn't strange at all that she didn't bleed like normal living beings. The puppet let loose a sinister chuckle as it cast an incantation seal with one hand, and the chopper immediately flew forth again, heading for the purple-blood puppet this time. With the puppet's massive body, it was an ideal target. The crimson-armored puppet had originally intended to strike only after the demon monarchs had expended all of their magic power, but Liu Zhu had descended into the pond, and he knew of a method to sever spirit veins. This made the crimson-armored puppet a lot more flustered and concerned. If the connection between this pond and the spirit vein really were severed, he'd still be dealt a severe punishment, even if he managed to kill these intruders. That was why it was unable to wait any longer. However, much to its surprise, Mu Qing had been extremely alert and set up countless invisible spirit threads in the nearby area, thereby allowing her to detect the puppet's location. However, that didn't matter to the puppet anyway. He possessed the insanely powerful 5-dragon chopper, and he had the infernal lightning beasts on his side, while his enemies had already expended a lot of their spiritual power in the preceding battle. With so many factors in its favor, it would be a simple task for it to kill all of the intruders. The crimson-robed figure stood atop the purple-blood puppet's shoulder, and a hint of fear flashed through his eyes at the sight of the oncoming silver chopper. He immediately pointed a finger toward the chopper, and the massive crimson ball before him tremored, then shot forth at a streak of crimson light. Almost at the exact same moment, the purple-blood puppet beneath his feet began to rapidly shrink amid flashes of purple light, reverting back down to the size of a normal human being in the blink of an eye. Immediately thereafter, its 6 eyes flashed in unison, and 6 pillars of crimson light erupted from within its pupils, hurtling forth in hot pursuit behind the crimson ball. The crimson-robed figure descended beside the purple-blood puppet, just as the silver streak of light plunged soundlessly into the crimson ball, and this was quite a welcoming sight to him. This crimson ball was not something that was manifested by normal blood essence. Instead, it was something that he'd refined from the myriad-year impure chi that he'd collected, and it specialized in corrupting all types of treasures with a 100% success rate to date. The silver chopper was indeed quite powerful, but there was no way that it would remain completely unaffected by this crimson ball. Just as these thoughts were flashing through the crimson-robed figure's mind, a loud explosion erupted, and the smile on his face immediately stiffened. The crimson ball had been punctured by boundless silver light in a flash, before exploding into a cloud of repugnant blood mist. The mist only drifted in the air for a few moments before it dissipated as putrid black chi. At this moment, the silver streak of light that was the 5-dragon chopper crashed into the 6 pillars of crimson light. As soon as the two opposing forces made contact with one another, the silver light wavered slightly, and it was slowed down a little for the first time. The 6 pillars of light struck it one after another, causing the silver streak of light to tremor as it reverted back to its original chopper form. The crimson-robed figure's eyes lit up, and he hurriedly made a hand seal. The pillars of crimson light then immediately converged to form a massive crimson sword, which clashed with the 5-dragon chopper. The chopper was incredibly sharp, but it was unable to immediately slice the crimson sword in half, and its progress was temporarily stalled as a result. A vicious light flashed through the crimson-armored puppet's eyes upon seeing this, and it recited a mantra in its mind. Brilliant silver light immediately erupted from the 5-dragon chopper, as boundless frosty light erupted forth again. In the end, the crimson sword was sliced into several segments by the frosty light, before disintegrating into a ball of crimson light. The crimson-robed figure in the figure hurriedly opened his mouth to expel a mouthful of blood essence upon seeing this. The blood essence then transformed into several crimson runes that swayed in front of him before abruptly disappeared without a trace. In the next instant, crimson light flashed erratically in the distance before converging again to form another crimson flying sword. The flying sword emitted a faint ringing sound as it clashed with the 5-dragon chopper again, not allowing the fearsome treasure to continue down its intended route. After witnessing Mu Qing's spontaneous death, the white-haired beauty had become quite fearful of the 5-dragon chopper, but she was ecstatic to see the crimson-robed figure's flying sword keeping it at bay. Thus, she turned her attention away from the black formation descending from above and hurriedly flipped her hand over to produce a black leather pouch, which she tossed up into the air. The pouch gently tipped itself over, and a burst of gray yin qi gushed forth from within in a frenzy. Over 100 yin armor profound ghosts appeared within the yin qi, but these ones were far more imposing in stature than the normal ghostly soldiers she'd refined. She had kept this ghostly army up his sleeve this entire time, as a trump card of sorts. The white-haired beauty then let loose a sharp screech, before pointing a finger at the crimson-armored puppet in the distance. All of the ghostly soldiers immediately heeded her call, brandishing their weapons as they rushed toward the puppet atop gusts of yin winds. The crimson-armored puppet merely chuckled coldly upon seeing this. It turned to the ghostly being beside it, which had the head of a horse and the body of a human, and asked, "Can I count on you to take care of those things?" "Rest assured, Master, I'll eradicate these low-grade ghostly beings with ease." The horse-headed ghostly being's body was remarkably translucent, and it gave a respectful bow in response to the puppet's question. The puppet nodded, and the ghostly being's body flashed with glazed light before it flew through the air as a 5-colored streak of light. Moments later, it plunged headfirst into the gusts of yin winds before manifesting a pair of long sabers out of thin air to battle the ghostly soldiers around it. The crimson-armored puppet paid no heed to that battle as it began to chant something, and unleashed the powers of the 5-dragon chopper at the expense of its spiritual sense. The silver streak of light immediately let loose a crisp ringing sound as it clashed with the crimson sword before splitting up into 5 streaks of light of different colors. One of those streaks of light continued to clash with the crimson sword, while the other 4 split up with 2 of them hurtling toward the crimson-robed figure, while the other 2 sped toward the white-haired beauty. The white-haired beauty's expression changed slightly, and she looked up at the descending black formation up above, then at the crimson-robed figure and the purple-blood puppet, and an indecisive look appeared on her face. There was clearly no hope for victory in such a situation, and she couldn't help but consider a retreat. However, right at this moment, a long cry erupted from below the golden light formation over the green pond, following which the surface of the formation rippled, causing the nearby ground to tremor slightly. The crimson-robed figure's cold voice suddenly sounded in her ears. "Fellow Taoist Liu Zhu is about to back soon." The white-haired beauty faltered slightly, and she hesitated for a moment longer while the 2 streaks of light sped toward her at an alarming rate. In the end, she could only heave a resigned sigh as the projection of the disheveled ghost appeared behind her again. She then made a grabbing motion with both hands, and the massive black ghost's huge hands reached out toward the oncoming streaks of light. At the same time, the white-haired beauty summoned a small white bone flag before sweeping it through the air, sending forth a burst of gray light that also sped toward the 2 opposing streaks of light. On the other end, even with the crimson-robed figure and the purple-blood puppet combining their powers, they were still engaged in an arduous battle against the 2 streaks of light that had flown toward them. Right at this moment, a sense of foreboding welled up in the white-haired beauty's heart, and she suddenly turned toward a certain corner of the palace, following which the veins on her forehead immediately bulged with fury. In the corner of the palace where Yuan Yao and Yan Li were standing, a young man had appeared beside them. He had his hands placed on the shoulders of the 2 women, and countless thin arcs of golden lightning were flowing from his palms into their bodies. The young man was naturally none other than Han Li, and the 2 women were trembling uncontrollably with expressions of agony on their faces as crimson threads were expelled from their body, one after another. "Don't you dare!" the white-haired beauty yelled with shock and fury in her voice. However, Han Li completely disregarded her rage, merely intensifying the power of the arcs of golden lightning flowing into the bodies of the two women instead. After all of the crimson threads were forced out of their bodies, the divine devil-bane lightning disappeared, and the two women slumped over, having fallen unconscious from the excruciating pain they had just endured. Azure light flashed from Han Li's body, sweeping up the two women before he hurtled directly toward the exit of the hall as a streak of azure light. The white-haired beauty was struggling to withstand the attacks from the two streaks of silver light, while expending a portion of her magic power to delay the rate at which the black formation was descending from above, so she was completely unable to do anything to Han Li. However, in her fit of rage, she still gritted her teeth as she swept a hand toward the streak of azure light from afar. During this split-second lapse in concentration, the formation descended by around another 10 feet. The white-haired beauty's heart jolted with shock upon seeing this, and she immediately injected more power into her war hammer, spurring on the 8 skulls to blast more green yin flames out of their mouths, thereby slowing down the formation's descent again. At this moment, Han Li was about to reach the exit when his expression suddenly changed drastically, and he abruptly diverged away from his original route. Immediately thereafter, Yin Qi converged in the air right above where he had been just a moment ago, and a gray ghostly claw appeared before swiping down like lightning. The pitch-black claws were around 10 feet in length each with green flames revolving around them, and as they swept through the air, even space itself was twisted and warped. If it weren't for the fact that Han Li had reacted extremely quickly and evaded well in advance, he would have been struck by that attack. Thankfully, even though the attack was devastatingly powerful, all of its power was dedicated to a single strike, so the ghostly claws immediately disappeared amid a dull thump after failing to make contact with Han Li. Han Li was quite elated to see this, yet just as he was about to fly toward the exit again, a sharp screech suddenly rang out from behind him. At the same time, a sharp gust of wind hurtled toward him, and his expression changed drastically as his body turned into a blur, covering several tens of feet in a rapid lateral movement. At this moment, a streak of green light flashed past the spot where he'd just been situated, then immediately disappeared. Han Li abruptly made a hand seal without even turning his head, while he swept his other sleeve back behind him. Brilliant golden light immediately erupted from his back, manifesting a golden projection with 3 heads and 6 arms, and the projection lashed with ferocious might with all 6 of its fists in unison. 6 fist projections appeared before combining to form a powerful gust of golden wind that swept through the air. Meanwhile, a dozen or so azure beads emerged from his sleeve before flying out behind him as well. At the same time, Han Li activated his Provenance True Devil Arts to its maximal extent, and a layer of golden scales appeared over his body. Simultaneously, black chi revolved around him, and a suit of black resentful armor also surfaced. In the instant that this suit of black armor appeared, a loud thunderclap erupted, and a lightning robe also draped itself over Han Li's body. In the blink of an eye, Han Li had set up 3 layers of protection around himself. Only then was he feeling slightly more assured as he cast his gaze behind him. However, before he had a chance to catch sight of anything, he heard an earth-shattering explosion erupt from behind him, following which a powerful shockwave swept through the air in all directions. Around 300 feet behind him, golden and green light had intertwined to speed up gale force winds, and within the piercing light stood an azure humanoid figure. Blue light flashed through Han Li's eyes, and only then was he able to identify the humanoid figure behind him. As a result of this discovery, an incredulous look appeared on his face. "Impossible," Han Li exclaimed. The humanoid figure swept her sleeves through the air and forced her way through the powerful winds. However, the azure lightning beads had also reached her at that point. The humanoid figure harumphed coldly and swept a sleeve through the air again, sending for a burst of light to brush these nondescript azure beasts aside. Of course, she had completely underestimated the power of these lightning beads. As soon as the swath of light she'd unleashed came into contact with the azure beads, the latter swelled to the size of wagon wheels, then collectively sped toward her. Loud thunderclaps erupted as the beads exploded to create a devastatingly powerful azure lightning clouds. The humanoid figure was completely caught off guard, and her heart jolted with shock as spiritual light abruptly flashed from her body, forming a green tree projection around her. Despite how fiercely powerful the lightning cloud was, it was successfully kept at bay by the tree projection. The humanoid figure wore a dark expression as she appraised Han Li with a cold look in her eyes. She was none other than Mu Qing, who should have already perished. She had used some kind of secret technique to escape with her life, and had been hiding in the shadows thereafter. However, when Han Li reappeared before trying to escape again, there was no way that she could stand by idly any longer. As such, she immediately sprang into action, only to be trapped in this lightning cloud in a moment of complacency. The lightning cloud certainly wasn't capable of killing her, but she wouldn't be able to emerge from it anytime soon. A chill ran down Han Li's spine at the sight of Mu Qing's frosty gaze, and his body swayed as he appeared at the exit. A ball of azure light was keeping the unconscious Yuan Yao and Yan Li hovering in midair, and he quickly waved a hand to draw the azure light toward him before tucking the two women under his arms. He took a deep breath, and a thunderclap erupted from behind him as he flapped his wings to escape from this perilous place. However, right at this moment, an unforeseen development struck again. Spatial fluctuations suddenly erupted beside him, following which a ball of blood mist appeared. A burst of sinister cackling rang out from within the mist, and a massive hand that reeked faux blood and gore shot forth like lightning, grabbing directly toward Han Li. The crimson hand had appeared completely out of the blue, extremely close to his body, so regardless of how fast he was, there was no way that he could evade it. His face paled, and golden light erupted from his body as he was forced to withstand this attack using his body. A resounding boom erupted as the crimson hand clawed through Han Li's lightning robe and black armor, then grabbed onto his shoulder. It was quite clear that the owner of this hand merely wanted to restrain Han Li rather than kill him. However, they had clearly underestimated the defensive properties of the layer of golden scales on Han Li's body. Han Li's azure robes naturally stood no chance in the face of the crimson hand, yet when the fingers of the hand clawed onto those golden scales, they were struck by a cold, slippery sensation, thereby preventing them from piercing through Han Li's skin. Meanwhile, Han Li certainly hadn't enjoyed that attack either. After being struck by the crimson hand, his body stumbled back, and he was also launched through the air. Thankfully, he possessed far superior movement techniques compared to normal cultivators, and his body twisted before turning into a blur, and he disappeared on the spot before the crimson hand could make a second grab for him. At this moment, brilliant crimson light erupted nearby, and a crimson humanoid figure appeared. It was none other than a blood puppet, but this one was no less powerful than a body integration cultivator. It was certainly far more formidable than the two that Han Li had slain in the past. As the purple-blood puppet in the distance was blasting crimson pillars of light out of its 6 eyes to combat the 2 streaks of silver light, the pair of eyes on the back of its head suddenly turned toward Han Li with a cold expression. Of course, Han Li was unaware of this, yet what he did know was that he definitely couldn't afford to be stalled here by this blood puppet. Otherwise, if any of the demon monarchs received some respite from the ongoing battle, then it would be impossible for him to escape. On top of that, the golden formation over the green pond had been rumbling incessantly, and Liu Zhu appeared to be close to breaking free as well. Right at this moment, the blood puppet turned to Han Li in an expressionless manner before slowly raising both hands. There was crimson light shimmering erratically on the tips of its fingers, and Han Li was greatly alarmed as he let loose a low cry before conjuring up several projections that fled into different directions. All of the projections were also carrying replicas of Yuan Yao and Yan Li, so there was no way to tell which one was the real Han Li. Crimson light flashed through the blood puppet's eyes, and it immediately turned its gaze toward one of the projections. It let loose a sinister cackle before abruptly disappearing amid a flash of crimson light. In the next instant, crimson light flashed next to the projection that the puppet had set its eyes on, and the blood puppet reappeared before instantly sweeping both hands through the air. Countless crimson claw projections were immediately launched toward the projection. This projection was naturally the real Han Li, but he didn't appear to be surprised at his inability to swindle the blood puppet. The expression on his face was remarkably calm as black light flashed from one hand to summon a rapidly expanding miniature black mountain before him, while he swept his other hand through the air to hurl forth a pair of azure scissors. The blood puppet's claw projections were indeed extremely powerful, but it was naturally unable to claw through the divine essence-effused mountain. Streaks of crimson light exploded over the surface of the small mountain, and it tremored violently amid a sharp screeching sound, but it was able to withstand the attack completely unscathed in the end. The blood puppet was quite taken aback by this development. At this moment, the azure scissors that Han Li had hurled through the air reached the blood puppet in a flash, and it transformed into a pair of azure lightning worms that rushed directly toward the puppet. This was none other than the pair of lightning worm scissors he'd obtained from the Tian Peng race. The blood puppet remained completely expressionless as it raised its hands to grab the oncoming lightning worms. A peculiar look appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this, and he suddenly took a few steps backward. He flapped his wings amid a flash of brilliant azure light, transforming into a translucent line along with Yuan Yao and Yan Li before disappearing into space. The blood puppet let loose a low roar as it thrust its palms forward instead. Two bursts of crimson light swept forth to swat the two lightning worms flying, and the blood puppet's body swayed as it prepared to set off in pursuit of Han Li. Right at this moment, golden light flashed from the ground below as a streak of golden sword chi and two streaks of bright saber chi broke through the ground before hurtling toward the puppet. The blood puppet was caught by surprise, and it immediately rushed several tens of feet to one side. Only then was it able to just barely evade those surprise attacks. It looked down to discover that two golden humanoid figures had appeared down below, both of which were around 10 feet tall and clad in suits of golden armor. One of them was wielding a golden spear, while the other was wielding twin sabers. They were a pair of expressionless golden-armored warriors. The blood puppet turned toward Han Li, only to discover that during this split-second delay, he had already flown far away as a streak of azure light. The puppet harumphed coldly, yet just as it was about to give chase, the two armored warriors down below blurred before appearing on either side of the blood puppet. One of them thrust its spear forward, and it transformed into a massive golden python that pounced with ferocious might. Meanwhile, the other warrior slashed its twin sabers through the air, sending countless golden blades of wind sweeping toward the puppet. These two golden-armored warriors were none other than the two shadow puppets summoned using Han Li's armor origin talismans. The two of them each possessed around 70% to 80% of Han Li's power and abilities, yet even so, they were still certainly not to be scoffed at. The blood puppet flew into a thunderous rage, but it was too wary of these golden puppets to pursue Han Li. Otherwise, it would only get attacked as soon as it tried to unleash a teleportation technique. It swept its sleeves through the air, and a gust of putrid crimson wind surged forth, sweeping aside the oncoming giant python and blades of wind. It then opened its mouth to blast forth two pillars of crimson light which punctured the bodies of the two armored warriors, easily blowing large holes into their chests. However, the crimson puppet's pupils immediately contracted at the sight of what happened next. The gaping wounds on the chests of the two golden-armored warriors healed amid a flash of golden light, and they were back to perfect condition again. One of them raised its golden spear, and a loud thunderclap rang out as a dozen or so arcs of golden lightning surged forth, transforming into golden lightning snakes mid-flight. Meanwhile, the other golden-armored warrior tossed its twin sabers into the air, and they revolved around as 5 skull projections emerged within a burst of golden light. The skull projections opened their mouths in unison to expel a wave of 5-colored flames. The surprise in the blood puppet's eyes grew even more pronounced. However, it wouldn't have been fazed even if Han Li had unleashed those attacks in person, let alone the fact that these puppets only possessed around 70% to 80% of Han Li's full power. As such, it made a hand seal, and specks of crimson light appeared all around its body. Those specks of crimson light then abruptly expanded to form balls of crimson light. The puppet swept an arm through the air, and the balls of light hurtled toward all directions in a soundless manner. The ball of light crashed into the arcs of lighting and wave of glacial flames amid a dull thump, and the balls of light transformed into balls of crimson flames. The attacks unleashed by the two golden-armored warriors were quickly vanquished, following which the crimson flames completely swept up their bodies. The two shadow puppets resisted using their weapons with all their might, and also unleashed swaths of gray light to protect themselves. But that only managed to stall the crimson flames slightly before they burst through and incinerated the bodies of the two puppets, rapidly melting them down into 2 puddles of blood. The blood puppet didn't pause in the slightest as it sped out of the palace as a streak of crimson light. Even though Han Li had already long since disappeared from view, the puppet wasn't fazed by this in the slightest. As long as Han Li was still somewhere within a radius of several hundred kilometers, it would still be able to easily detect his location with its spiritual sense before hunting him down. When the crimson streak of light rose up into the air, Han Li was already nowhere to be seen. However, the blood puppet merely chuckled coldly as it closed its eyes before making a hand seal, releasing its spiritual sense toward all directions. Letter 1D4 1F, letter 1D6 9B, letter 1D5 5 6, letter 1D6 8, letter 1D5 6 8, letter 1D5 F2, letter 1D4 1C, letter 1D5 FC, letter 1D5 FA. Mere moments later, the puppet opened its eyes before letting loose a long cry and setting off as a streak of crimson light again, heading directly toward the exit of that blue passageway. After just a few flashes, the streak of red light had disappeared into the distance. At its full speed, the blood puppet truly was astonishingly fast. It didn't take the blood puppet long at all to reach its destination, and the blue passageway was still intact there. According to the blood puppet's spiritual sense, Han Li had already fled to over 100 kilometers away, so it didn't pause in the slightest before flying into the blue passageway. Just as the crimson streak of light was about to emerge from the passageway, it was suddenly greeted by a beastly roar coupled with rumbling thunderclaps. The blood puppet was rather startled to hear this, and it hurriedly focused its gaze up ahead. There, an infernal lightning beast that was several tens of feet in size stood in the air above the entrance to the blue passageway, with silver arcs of lightning flashing erratically around its body. A loud roar erupted once again, as the infernal lightning beast came rushing down with ferocity in its eyes. "Impossible!" the blood puppet exclaimed in astonishment and horror. There were already 2 infernal lightning beasts in the palace. How could there possibly be a third one here? In the face of this fearsome beast, the blood puppet clearly wasn't going to continue in its pursuit of Han Li. Spiritual light immediately flashed from its body as it summoned a wooden badge. The wooden badge rotated in midair, before expelling a swath of light that protected its body within. The blood puppet then made a hand seal, and clouds of blood mist emanated from its body to create an additional layer of protection. In the face of an infernal lightning beast, which was a fearsome being at the pinnacle of the body integration stage, it had chosen to unleash its most potent defensive measures. Only then would it have a chance of withstanding the initial round of ferocious attacks from the infernal lightning beast, then think of a way to flee for its life. However, just as these thoughts were running through the blood puppet's mind, a burst of buzzing suddenly rang out around it. A series of silver runes then emerged out of thin air, and space was torn open amid flashes of spiritual light. Brilliant silver light radiated throughout the area as a massive silver formation of light slowly took shape. These were none other than the 9 palaces' heavenly talismans that Han Li had set up in advance. He had unleashed some kind of secret technique to activate this trap, even from such a long distance away. A peculiar look appeared on the infernal lightning beast's face, and it suddenly stopped in midair directly above the light formation. The blood puppet immediately sensed that something was amiss, but after taking a glance at the infernal lightning beast up above, it hesitated momentarily before plummeting toward the ground. However, after it had descended for several tens of feet, a pleasant bird call rang out, and silver light flashed as a silver fire raven appeared out of thin air. The bird was only around a foot in size, and it opened its mouth to expel a dozen or so azure beads that hurtled toward the blood puppet. The puppet found those beads to be slightly familiar, and its heart jolted with shock as it realized what they were. It had just witnessed the power of these beads, so it certainly wasn't willing to take on their fearsome might head-on. However, at such a close range, it was already too late for it to evade. As such, it could only abruptly spring back and retreat to temporarily open up some distance between itself and those lighting beads. However, unbeknownst to the blood puppet, what it was doing took it directly into the area encompassed by the 9 palaces' heavenly talismans, and the formation immediately took effect. The puppet saw a flash of silver light before its eyes, and the surrounding scenery blurred before it found itself situated within a vast expanse of murky white mist. The blood puppet hurriedly surveyed its surroundings, only to be greeted by the sight of tall walls and buildings that stretched as far as its eyes could see in all directions. Furthermore, the sky above had also been obscured by a vast expanse of silver light. The blood puppet was rooted to the spot upon making these observations. It was naturally able to immediately identify that it had been trapped in quite a powerful restriction, and that it wouldn't be very likely for it to escape in a short time. Meanwhile, outside the light formation, in the instant that the azure beads were also going to fly into the light formation, they suddenly stopped in midair, and the azure light shimmering around them was abruptly snuffed out. The beads then flew back and were calmly swallowed by the silver fire raven again. The bird then flapped its wings a few times and let loose a few cries of delight, seemingly quite elated with itself. The infernal lightning beast up above also let loose a few ape cries as the silver arcs of lightning around it disappeared. Black light flashed, and the infernal lightning beast quickly shrank down to become a small black monkey that was only around half a foot tall. It was none other than Han Li's weeping soul beast. Seeing as the blood puppet had been trapped in the formation, the weeping soul beast immediately flew away as a streak of black light. Meanwhile, the silver fire raven circled around in the air a few times before dissipating as specks of silver flames. Over 100 kilometers away, Han Li was flying through the air as quickly as he could while carrying Yuan Yao and Yan Li in a swath of azure light. All of a sudden, an ecstatic look appeared on his face. He made a hand seal before grabbing the air before him, and a dull thump rang out as a ball of silver flames appeared out of thin air before transforming into a silver fire raven. As soon as the fire raven appeared, it immediately opened its mouth to expel the dozen or so lightning beads again. Han Li swept a sleeve through the air to sweep up the lightning beads, following which the fire raven also disappeared into his body. A contemplative look appeared on Han Li's face, and he slowed down a little in his flight. Moments later, a streak of black light approached him from afar before landing beside him. The black light then faded, and the small monkey that was the weeping soul beast sprang onto his shoulder. A smile appeared on Han Li's face as he stroked the little monkey's fur. Han Li had witnessed the flawless teamwork between the weeping soul beast and the spirit engulfing fire raven from the wisp of spiritual sense that he'd infused into the bird's body. It was quite surprising that they were able to trap the fearsome blood puppet so easily, but he certainly wasn't going to complain. He swept a sleeve through the air, and the small monkey also disappeared into the spirit beast bracelet hidden up his sleeve as a streak of black light. After that, Han Li didn't hold back any longer as he flapped his wings with all his might, and five-colored spiritual light flashed alongside azure light as he streaked through the air as a translucent thread. After just a few flashes, he had disappeared without a trace. Meanwhile, Mu Qing was still trapped within the lightning cloud in the underground palace. In the face of her relentless attacks, the lightning cloud was finally approaching a spent force. Above the green pond, the white-haired beauty, the crimson-robed figure, and the purple-blood puppet were still engaged in an arduous battle against the five-dragon chopper. One giant blade after another had appeared in the air around them, and they were unleashing countless streaks of frosty light that had destroyed a dozen or so of their treasures already. Their situation had truly become quite dire, and they were holding on by the skin of their teeth. The black formation up above was also only just over 100 feet away from them, and it appeared as if it could fall on them at any moment. The ghostly soldiers that the white-haired beauty had summoned earlier was engaged in battle with the high-grade ghostly being under the crimson-armored puppet's command. After joining forces, the ghostly soldiers held a decisive upper hand and had completely trapped the high-grade ghostly being. As for the crimson-armored puppet, it was making a hand seal, but it wore an indecisive expression, seemingly wanting to do something, but also quite hesitant at the same time. In this extremely chaotic situation, the golden formation over the green pond finally shattered, and the white spirit mist within came surging out again. A long cry erupted from within the pond, and black light flashed as a tall and broad humanoid figure emerged. Close to an hour later, a string of earth-shattering booms suddenly erupted from within the area encompassed by the black light barrier. The light barrier then began to tremor violently, and a string of relentless explosions erupted from underground. Several thick pillars of light then burst into the air in a radius of several kilometers, with the smaller palace above the ground at the center, and the entire ground in that area completely crumbled as the result. The palace collapsed in its entirety, and a massive crater took its place. There were several long fissures near the crater that were several tens of feet wide and extended for close to 10 kilometers. All of a sudden, a few roars of fury erupted from within the crater, and several balls of spiritual light flew out from within. One of the balls of light led the others by over 1,000 feet. In the blink of an eye, all of the balls of spiritual light reached the blue passageway before exiting the black light barrier and hurtling away into the distance. At this moment, a battle suddenly broke out between the balls of spiritual light that were lagging behind the first one. All of them were attacking one another, while relentlessly pursuing that ball of light at the forefront. One of the balls of light suddenly faltered before detaching itself from the battle, flying off alone in another direction. Thus, silence returned to the area around the black light barrier. Han Li sped through the air with the two women, while carefully using his spiritual sense to internally inspect the tracking marks within his body. Thankfully, the marks were still just as resolute as ever and showed signs of coming loose. Only then was Han Li feeling slightly more reassured, but he couldn't allow himself to breathe a sigh of relief just yet. He knew that the demon monarchs were clearly engaged in some other important activity, so they didn't have any time to come after him. Once they finished the tasks at hand and thought of Han Li, they'd activate the tracking marks within his body, and he wouldn't be able to repress them for much longer after that. Thus, Han Li didn't intend to continue fleeing like this. After traveling for close to 1 million kilometers, a set of undulating hills that were enshrouded in dense yin qi appeared up ahead. Han Li paused for a brief moment of contemplation before descending with the two women, disappearing into the black yin qi after just a few flashes. The hills weren't as bleak and desolate as Han Li had imagined. Aside from some short gray bushes and scrubs that were growing over the bumpy terrain, there were even several types of tall trees here. The bark on these trees were all quite dull and lusterless, but they were extremely lush, and the branches and leaves extending from them encompassed close to half of the hills in the area. Han Li flew for a while longer through the black qi before stopping at one of the hills. He swept his spiritual sense through the surrounding area, and after ensuring that there were no powerful ghostly beings nearby, he immediately rustled his sleeve to summon a small golden sword. The small sword swayed before transforming into several streaks of golden light that crashed violently toward a rock face. Following a series of dull thumps, a large cave was carved out, and the streaks of golden light squirmed into the cave like a group of spirit snakes. Han Li stood before the cave with his hands clasped behind his back, and after about 5 minutes, the small golden sword returned to him. Han Li's expression changed slightly as he flipped a hand over to produce a stack of small flags of different colors. He tossed the flags through the air, and they disappeared into the cave as streaks of light of different colors. A burst of seemingly ordinary black mist then billowed out of the cave, perfectly merging with the nearby yin qi. Han Li waved a hand toward the swath of azure light behind him before entering the cave that had just been carved out. The two women were being carried within the swath of azure light, and they also drifted slowly into the black mist. The deepest part of this temporary cave abode wasn't very large. It was only just over 100 feet in radius. However, it was situated right at the center of the hill, so it was extremely deep and discreet. Han Li appeared at the end of the stone tunnel, before taking a seat with his legs crossed as the center of the makeshift cave abode. The two women had also been carried here by the azure light, and they were gently laid onto the ground. The azure light disappeared in a flash, but the eyes of the two women were still tightly shut, and both of them remained in an unconscious state. Han Li didn't find this to be surprising at all. Those crimson threads were clearly extremely sinister items, and he had to forcibly inject his divine devilbane lightning into their bodies in order to rid them of those crimson threads as quickly as possible. On top of that, these two women possessed semi-ghostly bodies themselves, so they were naturally unable to handle the excruciating pain of having his divine lightning course through their bodies. Of course, this was also very much a result of the fact that these two women didn't possess powerful enough physical bodies. If they possessed bodies as powerful as Han Li's, they'd be able to shrug off this pain with ease. However, seeing as Han Li was willing to employ this method to rid the crimson threads from their bodies in the first place, he was clearly confident that he'd be able to rouse the two from their unconsciousness after the event. Spiritual light flashed from his hands as a dozen or so thin and long silver needles appeared on his palm, along with a stack of azure talismans. He raised a hand, and the silver needles shot forth, piercing into the bodies of the two women until only half of the needles remained exposed. The two women still didn't wake up, but expressions of pain appeared on their faces. However, Han Li paid their reactions no heed as the azure talismans in his other hand descended toward the two women as a collective swath of azure light. As the azure spiritual light shimmered around their bodies, the pain on the two women's faces gradually eased, and their complexions also improved significantly. Han Li then made a hand seal and cast one profound incantation seal after another through the film and azure light and into the bodies of the two women. As he cast those incantation seals, the silver needles also began to tremor gently in an extremely rhythmic manner while flashing with silver light. Han Li exhaled as he waved a hand through the air, and silver light flashed from the two women's bodies as the silver needles flew back before disappearing up his sleeve. After doing all that, Han Li said in a calm voice, "It's time to wake up, fellow Taoists." Han Li's voice wasn't very loud, but he'd unleashed his spirit's unthorn ability as he spoke. Of course, he only unleashed the ability to an extremely slight extent so that it was just enough to rouse them, but not powerful enough to harm their spiritual sense. Yuan Yao moaned as her long eyelashes fluttered, and she opened her eyes with a disoriented look on her face. A thought then suddenly occurred to her, and she immediately rose up into a sitting position with a shocked expression in her eyes. Fellow Taoist Han. Yuan Yao's expressions eased significantly at the sight of Han Li, and she was just about to say something when Han Li waved a hand to cut her off with a grim expression on his face. If you have something to say, you can say it later. For now, check to see if there are any residual crimson threads in your body. Yuan Yao adopted a serious expression as she nodded and crossed her legs before closing her eyes. Moments later, Yan Li also awakened and received the same instruction from Han Li. After a short while, both women heaved a collective sigh of relief as they opened their eyes again. Those things within my body have already been completely removed. Thank you, Brother Han. If it weren't for you, my junior martial sister and I would have never been able to escape from that nightmarish situation, Yan Li said as she extended a grateful bow toward Han Li. Prior to falling unconscious, they had been unable to control their bodies, but they remained full aware and alert. As such, after having the restrictions placed on them, the two women were filled with horror, thinking that they'd be reduced to mindless slaves for the rest of their lives. Much to their surprise and elation, Han Li was still able to save them in such a dire situation. Yan Li didn't know how Han Li had managed to accomplish this near-impossible feat, as she'd already fallen unconscious at that point, but it had to have been an extremely perilous process. As such, her words of gratitude were quite genuine and earnest. Letter 1D627, letter 1D633, letter 1D626, letter 212F, letter 1D4CC, letter 1D626, letter 1D4B8, letter 1D630, letter 1D4C2. Yuan Yao also bowed alongside Yan Li. Even though she didn't say anything, the gratitude in her eyes was plain to see. There's no need to thank me, fellow Taoists. By saving you too, I'm also benefiting myself. I've managed to forcibly seal away the tracking marks in my body, but I won't be able to keep this up for long. The demon monarchs could activate them at any moment, so I'll have to ask the two of you to see if the yin qi in this area will be sufficient to help rid me of these tracking marks. Han Li's survival hinged on whether he could expel these tracking marks from his body, so he immediately raised the issue without any delay. The two women glanced at one another upon hearing this before surveying their surroundings, while detecting the yin qi in this place. After a while, Yuan Yao turned to Han Li and asked, "The yin qi here isn't as abundant as we'd like, but we have a 60% to 70% chance of being able to expel those tracking marks. Do you think we should find another place with more abundant yin qi or take a risk here?" 60% to 70%. That's already enough. We most likely won't have enough time to search for a more suitable place. Those demon monarchs are already aware that I'm still alive, and as soon as they finish what they're doing, they'll definitely activate these tracking marks and come after me. Han Li replied in a resolute manner following a brief moment of contemplations. He was normally quite conservative and didn't like to take risks, but if a risk had to be taken, then he certainly wasn't going to hesitate. Yan Li wore an expression of approval as she said, "All right, my junior martial sister and I will immediately set up the reincarnation yin gathering formation and use the power of this formation to gather a vast amount of yin qi in a short time. Using this yin qi, the three of us should be able to combine our powers to eradicate those tracking marks." It was quite clear that she was also of the opinion that they should take a risk here rather than searching for any alternative venues. Yuan Yao was slightly more hesitant, but she quickly banished her indecision and nodded in agreement as well. Time was of the essence, so the three of them naturally weren't going to delay any longer. After arriving at an agreement, the three of them rose up into the air at a low altitude within the temporary cave abode. Yan Li swept her gaze around the surrounding area before immediately raising a hand. Yin winds abruptly converged within her palm, then transformed into a small gray flag in the blink of an eye. She tossed the flag into the air and began to chant something at the same time. The flag rotated in midair and emitted countless strands of gray yin threads that danced through the air at her behest. Han Li inspected the small flag in the air above through narrowed eyes. The countless yin threads suddenly converged to form a sharp straight spike that pointed a certain direction. It was aimed directly at another nearby hill. Found it. That should be the place in the nearby area where the yin qi is most abundant. That's the most suitable location to set up the core of our formation, Yan Li announced. Yuan Yao's eyes lit up upon hearing this, and the three of them hurriedly flew over to that nearby hill. After that, Han Li stood off to the side to ward off any potential unwelcome intruders, while the two women began to set up their formation. The formation covered such a vast area that encompassed the entire hill down below. Han Li looked on at the formation that was gradually taking shape, and a contemplative look appeared on his face as he stroked his chin in an absent-minded manner. After 2 hours, the two women were still setting up the formation, and even the normally calm and steadfast Han Li was starting to become a little anxious. After all, time was not a luxury that he could currently afford much of, as the demon monarchs could activate the tracking marks within his body at any moment. However, Han Li was quite proficient in the art of spell formations himself, so he knew just how complex this giant formation was to set up. As such, he forced himself to repress the urgency and concern in his heart as he waited in silence in the air above. After around another half an hour, the two women flew over to Han Li. Yan Li wore a wide smile as she said, "Brother Han, the formation is ready. We can gather yin qi to eradicate the tracking marks within your body now." Han Li was ecstatic to hear this, and he was just about to give a reply when his face suddenly paled, and he shuddered as a layer of azure light surfaced around his body. Both of the women were given a fright upon seeing this. Golden light flashed around Han Li's body as he righted himself, but he wore a grim expression on his face as he said, "Someone S activated one of the tracking marks. I don't know which demon monarch it is, though." The spiritual pressure emanating from his body fluctuated erratically as he spoke, and the two women exchanged a glance with concern in their eyes. "It's all right, I can still suppress the tracking marks for now. Once we eradicate them, I'll be fine," Han Li said as he forced a smile onto his face. "You're right, Brother Han. Let's get started right away then," Yuan Yao said as she took a deep breath to compose herself. "Of course. However, before we start, I have to tell you something, Brother Han. This secret technique to draw yin qi into one's body is meant to be used on ghostly cultivators and ghostly beings. With your human body, this process will be excruciatingly painful, and even you're not careful, you could even fall unconscious from the pain. If you do that, you'll be unable to guide the yin qi into your own body, and all our prior efforts will go to waste." "You understand what I mean, Brother Han?" Yan Li cautioned with a grave expression. "Excruciating pain, you say? I may not be good for much else, but I'm rather confident in my body," Han Li chuckled nonchalantly. Han Li wasn't exaggerating in the slightest. His physical body had reached a ridiculous powerful level. He had cultivated several types of body refinement secret techniques and also refined his body through the use of many rare spirit medicines. Pain that was excruciating to others was something that he could simply ignore. Yan Li nodded at the sight of Han Li's confident expression and immediately led him to the core of the formation, which was that aforementioned hill where the yin qi was most abundant. There was a small plateau of just over 100 feet in size at the summit of the hill, and small formation had been set up there at the center of the larger formation. The three of them walked into the small formation side by side, and Han Li sat down with his legs crossed at its center, while the two women sat on either side of him. Han Li slowly closed his eyes, and the two women opened their mouths in unison to expel a black bead each. The beads rotated in midair before flying toward two opposite directions, embedding themselves into the slots that had been prepared well in advance on either side of the formation. After that, the two women both made a hand seal at the same time, and a faint ringing sound erupted from the formation. Bursts of black light emerged all around the formation before rippling outward. All of a sudden, the entire massive formation around the hill was activated. Balls of yin qi rose up into the sky from many locations on the formation, before rapidly rotating in midair to form a massive vortex at an altitude of over 1,000 feet. The vortex was so vast that it encompassed an even larger area than the massive spell formation down below, creating quite an intimidating sight to behold. An immense burst of suction force was emanating from the vortex, and the pure yin qi in the air as well as deep within the ground surged forth in a frenzy as wisps of black qi to be absorbed by the black vortex. As a result, the vortex expanded even further, thereby allowing it to draw on yin qi from an even larger area. Letter 1D65 B, letter 1D4F B, letter 1D486, letter 1D486, letter 1D498, letter 1D65A. Letter 1d658, letter 1d664, letter 1d662. If Han Li were to open his eyes and look up into the sky at this moment, he'd witness balls of black light rapidly rotating at the center of the vortex, crushing all types of yin qi before fusing them together again. At the very center of the vortex, an inky black ball was slowly taking shape. A burst of astonishing spiritual pressure was seeping out of the black ball, and it seemed to possess an extremely immense burst of power that could plummet through the entire vortex at any moment. Yuan Yao and Yan Li chanted unintelligible incantations in low voices, while constantly making a series of hand seals, casting one incantation seal after another, toward the small formation that they were situated in, thereby causing the vortex up above to further accelerate in its rotation. In just this short period of time alone, the vortex had already drawn a staggering amount of yin qi. Right at this moment, ghostly howls erupted in the distance from all directions. It seemed that countless ghostly beings had been drawn to the vortex and were converging toward them. Yuan Yao's brows furrowed slightly upon hearing this. Even though she couldn't sense any particularly powerful ghostly beings nearby, having so many ghostly beings attack their formation was certainly no laughing matter. It seemed that they had underestimated the appeal of such pure yin qi to these ghostly beings. Before she had a chance to rise to her feet and set off to kill some of the low-grade ghostly beings, Han Li suddenly rustled a sleeve to summon a black spirit beast bracelet. The bracelet rotated in midair before a streak of golden light, and a ball of black light shot forth from within. The lights then faded to reveal a small leopard-like beast and a small black monkey. They were none other than the Weeping Soul Beast and the leopard Kirin Beast. As soon as the two beasts appeared, the Weeping Soul Beast transformed into a massive ape that was over 100 feet tall amid a flash of black light, then leaped out of the small formation. Meanwhile, the leopard Kirin Beast swayed to conjure up a dozen or so afterimages before disappearing in a flash. Yuan Yao faltered slightly upon seeing this, but Yan Li merely smiled and said, "Rest assured, Junior Martial Sister Yuan, Brother Han was able to save us from the demon monarchs, so his abilities certainly far outstrip ours, and he would definitely have a way to repel these low-grade ghostly beings. They won't be able to disrupt our formation." "You're right, Senior Martial Sister. It appears I was overcomplicating things," Yuan Yao replied with a relieved smile. "You're far too kind in your assessment of me, Fairy Yan, but these low-grade ghostly beings are indeed not a cause for concern," Han Li replied with a smile without opening his eyes. Right at this moment, a thunderous ape roar suddenly erupted in the distance, and all of the ghostly howls in that direction suddenly ceased. In contrast, countless howls of anguish erupted from the other side, and all of those ghostly howls were filled with horror. Those ghostly howls quickly receded into the distance, and everything soon fell silent in that direction as well. "Looks like your spirit beasts are truly extraordinary, Brother Han, to think that they were able to take care of those ghostly beings so easily." A hint of surprise flashed through Yan Li's eyes as she spoke. She was confident that those ghostly beings were definitely no match for the two spirit beasts, but she was still rather surprised that they'd been taken care of so quickly. Han Li merely smiled and gave no response to this. The leopard Kirin beast had most likely only killed a small portion of the ghostly beings on its side, before scaring the rest away through intimidation. But all of the ghostly beings on the Weeping Soul Beast's side had most likely been devoured already. After a while, Han Li said, "I've already prepared my meridians from an influx of yin qi, and it looks like we've gathered enough yin qi already, so let's begin. There's only one demon monarch activating their tracking mark at the moment. If a few more tracking marks are activated, then I won't be able to repress them." Yan Li glanced up at the vortex in the air through narrowed eyes as she said in a solemn voice, "It's indeed about time. Let's begin, Junior Martial Sister Yuan." Yuan Yao nodded in agreement, with a serious expression on her face. Thus, black light flashed from the hands of the two women as they each produced a small black flag that was around an inch in length, then tossed them toward either side of the formation at the same time. The two flags immediately transformed into a pair of giant flags that stood outside the small formation. The two women then made another hand seal in unison, and a loud burst of rumbling immediately rang out from above. The massive black balls within the vortex suddenly flashed with black light, and as it continued to slowly rotate, two streaks of black light descended, carrying two bursts of black qi that were so dense that they appeared to be streaks of viscous black liquid. The black qi then disappeared, without a trace into the two giant flags. Black chi suddenly began to surge around Yuan Yao and Yan Li's bodies, following which they began to emit a powerful burst of spiritual pressure. The two women let loose sharp cries as they raised their hands in unison, flicking their fingers toward Han Li in quick succession. Countless black threads shot froth from their fingertips, disappearing into Han Li's body in a flash. However, Han Li merely shuddered slightly in response, before displaying no further signs of discomfort. Yuan Yao and Yan Li couldn't help but exchange a glance upon seeing this, and both of them could see their own admiration mirrored in each other's eyes. However, they didn't stop what they were doing during this process, and countless black threads surged toward Han Li like a torrential storm before instantly disappearing into his body. Aside from the fact that Han Li's body was glowing with a faint azure light, there was nothing to suggest that he was experiencing any discomfort at all. Yuan Yao and Yan Li were truly stunned upon seeing this. The two of them had fallen unconsciously almost immediately after the divine Devilbane lightning had been injected into their bodies, and the amount of yin qi that had been injected into Han Li's body already far outstripped the amount of divine Devilbane lightning that they had had to withstand. As such, the two of them were growing rather hesitant. Just as the two women were trying to decide how to proceed, Han Li's calm voice sounded. "Keep going. I can sense the tracking marks in my body loosening slightly." Yan Li took a deep breath upon hearing this, and she nodded at Yuan Yao before continuing the injection process. The black qi around her body surged before flaring up to more than twice its original height, then converging to form a ball of piercing black light that completely inundated her body. Yuan Yao hesitated momentarily as she took a glance at Han Li, and his still figure seemed to have instilled confidence into her heart, as she also replicated Yan Li's actions. Moments later, two inky black pillars of light shot forth from within the yin qi before disappearing into Han Li's body in a flash. With such a huge influx of yin qi at once, even Han Li couldn't help but groan with pain as his body swayed. The azure light around his body flickered unsteadily. 2 hours later, the black vortex above the hill had ceased in its rotation. An inky black ball that was over 100 feet in diameter was slowly revealed. Black light swept down from the ball, injecting itself in a frenzy into the two massive black flags on either side of the formation. The restrictions within the massive flags then sent bursts of pure yin power surging toward the core of the massive formation. At this point, the small formation on the summit of the hill had already been completely enshrouded in black light. Han Li and the two women were no longer visible as a result, and aside from the low buzzing emanating from the spell formation, there were no other sounds to be heard. As time passed, the massive black ball in the sky grew smaller and smaller. This was naturally due to the fact that it was constantly losing pure yin qi. All of a sudden, a loud cry erupted from within the formation down below, causing the black light to tremor unsteadily. A resounding thump then rang out as a fist-sized ball of green light rushed out of the black light, attempting to fly toward a certain direction. However, a streak of golden sword qi then shot forth from within the black light amid a cold harumph, and the sword qi instantly pulverized the ball of green light. The black light within the formation immediately became more sparse, revealing 3 indistinct seated humanoid figures. At the same time, the buzzing sound from the small formation temporarily ceased. Moments later, Han Li's voice rang out from within the black light, and his tone comprised of both exhaustion yet also a hint of excitement. "Thank you for your hard work, fellow Taoists. The first mark has already been eradicated. Let's keep going." "Brother Han, can your body really handle so much yin qi? How about we take a short rest before we continue?" Yuan Yao asked in a concerned voice. "Thank you for your concern, Fairy Yuan, but time is of the essence, and we have to get rid of the 3 remaining tracking marks as soon as possible. Any delay could prove to be catastrophic," Han Li replied with a wry smile. "If you think it's fine, then Junior Martial Sister Yuan and I won't try to dissuade you. If you're unable to hold on, then give us a signal, and we'll immediately stop," Yan Li said in a serious voice. "All right, let's continue then," Han Li said without any hesitation. Thus, Yuan Yao heaved a faint sigh, and the black light within the formation intensified in brightness once again. The two women then continued to inject pillars of black light into Han Li's body. Right as the first tracking mark was expelled from Han Li's body and destroyed, the humanoid figure that was enshrouded in green light cast her gaze toward Han Li's direction with bewilderment etched on her face. The humanoid figure was situated on a tall mountain several 100,000 kilometers away from Han Li's location, and she murmured to herself, "How could this be? My tracking mark was destroyed." Theoretically, there's no way for cultivators below the body integration stage to be able to accomplish this. Could it be that he's receiving assistance from a powerful being? The humanoid figure was naturally none other than Mu Qing. For some reason, she had detached herself from the group of demon monarchs and set off to search for Han Li on her own. During the process, she unleashed a secret technique to activate the tracking mark that she'd planted within Han Li's body, thereby giving him no choice but to destroy it first. This is getting a little troublesome now. In the instant that the tracking mark was destroyed, I managed to gauge the direction that he's in, but it'll be almost impossible to find him over such a vast area. Looks like I can only try my luck, Mu Qing murmured to herself with her brows tightly furrowed before immediately flying away as a streak of green light. Elsewhere, on a set of barren plains that was covered in stark white bones, 3 humanoid figures and a puppet were facing off against one another. "Brother Liu Zhu, we've already shaken off that mayfly race puppet and the 2 infernal lightning beasts, so it's time you brought out the divine infernal river elixir and split it between the 3 of us." The one who had spoken was none other than the crimson-robed figure that was standing atop the purple-blood puppet's shoulder. "You've been ignoring us this entire time. Could it be that you intend to take the divine elixir for yourself? Have you forgotten the vows we swore and the blood restrictions we placed on each other's bodies before we set off? If Dai Zhu and I activate those restrictions without any regard for our own safety, then your cultivation base would be severely damaged as a result." The white-haired beauty threatened in a cold voice with the 8 ghost monarchs around her. The black-robed man that they were confronting was naturally none other than Liu Zhu. He was hovering right before the white-haired beauty and the crimson-robed figure, and after taking a glance at the 2 of them, he finally replied, "I initially intended to split the divine elixir evenly with all of you, but unfortunately, it appears that someone else has recently extracted some divine elixir from the pond, and what remained of it is barely enough for my own use, so how can I split it with all of you as well? How about this? I'll take the divine elixir, but I have many precious items that I can offer the 2 of you in exchange. Will that suffice?" What kind of precious items could compare with the divine infernal river elixir? Unless you have some kind of miracle medicine that can help us progress to the grand ascension stage, what else could compare to the value for the divine elixir for cultivators of our cultivation base? The white-haired beauty asked in an enraged voice. Meanwhile, the crimson-robed figure refrained from saying anything. Seeing as the crimson-robed figure didn't immediately turn down this offer, Liu Zhu turned to him and asked, "What do you think, Brother Dai Zhu?" There were 2 demon monarchs opposing Liu Zhu at the moment, but if one of them agreed to Liu Zhu's proposal, then the other one would be powerless to resist. After all, Liu Zhu was far more powerful than either one of them. "Dai Zhu, have you gone senile in your old age? Are you seriously contemplating agreeing to this proposal?" the white-haired beauty asked in a cold voice. "If there really is so little divine elixir left, then even if fellow Taoist is willing to split it between us, it wouldn't do anyone any good. So what difference does it make if we split it or allow one of us to keep it? Unless you want to be the one to take all of the divine elixir instead, fellow Taoist Lan." The crimson-robed figure mused in a dark voice. "My thoughts exactly, fellow Taoist Dai Zhu," Liu Zhu chuckled in response. The white-haired beauty faltered slightly upon hearing this, but a cold smile then appeared on her face as she said, "Who knows if there really is as little divine elixir as he claims? I haven't seen it for myself. Am I supposed to just take his word for it?" "Indeed, that's also what I'm hesitating about. Fellow Taoist Liu Zhu, would you be able to present proof to support your claim?" the crimson-robed figure asked as a cold light flashed through his eyes. Liu Zhu was silent for a moment before heaving a long sigh as he said, "The divine infernal river elixir only works extremely well during its first application. When consuming and bathing in it for a second time, its effects will be almost negligible. I'm sure the 2 of you are aware of this. I wouldn't turn on the 2 of you for something that's useless. I've gone mad. You 2 still don't know how divine infernal river elixir is stored, right? What are you trying to say? Could it be that extraction of divine infernal river elixir requires more than just severing its connection with the spirit vein?" the white-haired beauty asked in a skeptical voice. Instead of replying to her question, Liu Zhu rustled a sleeve, and an object fell into his hand. He gently raised the object for their inspection, revealing it to be a rectangular brick that seemed to have been made from a crystalline material. Letter 1D68F, letter 1D42B, letter 1D68T, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D568, letter 1D41E, letter 1D554, letter 1D428, letter 1D5FA. The surface of the brick was quite smooth and extremely transparent. At the center of this brick, a ball of fist-sized red liquid could be seen. Even though it was separated from everyone by a layer of crystal, the astonishing spiritual chi emanating from the liquid had still formed wisps of white spiritual mist that drifted throughout the surrounding area. This is known as a tempered crystal brick, and it's something used by the Mayfly race solely for extracting and storing divine infernal river elixir. If this object were to be placed in the pond within the palace, it would immediately fuse as one with the spirit vein there, and it would be extremely difficult to recover it. Once the divine elixir is drawn into this object, even body integration cultivators wouldn't be able to extract the divine elixir from it in a short time, unless they possessed a secret talisman produced by the Mayfly race. The only way to extract the divine elixir without the talisman would be to use the true flames within our bodies to refine this brick for over 10 years. With this, I'm sure the two of you can see just how little divine elixir I've managed to extract, Liu Zhu explained in a calm voice. The crimson-robed figure inspected the brick with a hint of greed in his eyes, and he said in a skeptical voice, "The spiritual mist emanating from this liquid is identical to the mist around the pond, so that should indeed be the divine infernal river elixir. But don't you think it's an exaggeration to claim that we won't be able to destroy this brick?" After a brief silence, Liu Zhu proposed, "It looks like you won't believe me no matter what I say. So be it. I'll set this item in the air above us, and the two of you can unleash one attack each afar to try and destroy it. If you can leave so much as a single scratch on the brick, I'll immediately hand over the divine infernal river elixir. If not, I'll be taking the divine elixir, and I'll give the two of you other precious items in exchange for it. Alternatively, you can activate the restrictions you've placed on my body, but if you do that, the two of you won't end up in a much better situation than I will. Instead, a third party could come along to take the divine elixir, and in our severely debilitated states, we'd be powerless to stop them." "Are you serious?" The white-haired beauty's eyes immediately lit up, clearly very tempted by this offer. "Of course," Liu Zhu chuckled in response. "All right, you have yourself a deal." The white-haired beauty was clearly very confident in her abilities. "If I can't damage this brick, then I won't ask for items in exchange. All I ask is that Brother Liu Zhu accompanies me to the devilish tomb to secure two of the treasures there," the crimson-robed figure said. "The devilish tomb. The powerful devils buried in there have been dead for countless years, but those devilish artifacts have already attained sentient will and are even more powerful than most divine spirit treasures. On top of that, the devilish chi and yin chi in there are extremely dense, making it very difficult to traverse through it. Didn't you and fellow Taoist Mu Qing already raid the tomb once already, only for the trip to end in failure?" Liu Zhu's brows furrowed in reluctance. "Why are you asking a question you already know the answer to? Seeing as that hand Brad is still alive, we'll be able to make use of his divine devilbane lightning to ward off the devilish chi and yin chi. If you accompany us as well, then our success will virtually be ensured." Fellow Taoist Mu Qing departed halfway, most likely to search for that hand Brad already. The white-haired beauty's brows furrowed upon hearing the crimson-robed figure's condition. "If we go to the devilish tomb, we'll most likely be delayed quite significantly there. If the Mayfly race reinforcements arrive during that time, none of us will be able to get away." Liu Zhu's voice wasn't quite as resolute as it had been before. If the Mayfly race really can access this space so quickly, then why would that puppet have confronted us? It could have just waited for reinforcements to arrive. No one from the Mayfly race should be able to enter this place in a short time. Of course, there will be some risk involved, but surely you should take some risks for us, seeing as you're taking all of the divine infernal river elixir, Brother Liu Zhu, the crimson-robed figure chuckled. Liu Zhu remained completely expressionless, but the contemplative look in his eyes indicated that he was weighing up his options. Only after a long while did he finally reply, "All right, I'll accompany you to the devilish tomb, but I'll only assist you in securing two of the treasures in there. If you want to secure additional treasures, then you'll have to do so with your own power." "Haha, you have yourself a deal. As for the tempered crystal brick, I trust that you're telling the truth, so I won't try to damage it." The crimson-robed figure chortled with glee before drifting back several tens of feet. The purple-blood puppet beside him also retreated a few steps in a wooden manner. "What do you want to do, fellow Taoist Lan?" Seeing as Daizu had struck up a deal with him, Liu Zhu was feeling a lot more assured, and a cold light flashed through his eyes as he turned to the white-haired beauty. The white-haired beauty's pupils contracted, and only after a brief hesitation did she reply in a cold voice, "I have the same condition as fellow Taoist Daizu, But before that, I want to test if this brick truly is indestructible as you claim." "Sure, go ahead then." Liu Zhu immediately raised his hand, and the tempered crystal brick hovered into the air 70 to 80 feet above his head. The white-haired beauty stared at the brick with a hint of scorching desire in her eyes before sweeping a sleeve through the air, upon which the 8 ghost monarchs behind her instantly sprang into action. Black light flashed, and the white-haired beauty donned that suit of black armor again as the massive war hammer appeared in her hand. 8 ghostly howls erupted from the war hammer, and Liu Zhu glanced at the weapon as he warned, "Your treasure is indeed quite powerful, but it won't be able to break the tempered crystal brick. I'm warning you in advance, don't try any sneaky tricks while you attack the brick. Otherwise, don't blame me for turning on you. HMPH, let me see if this thing really is indestructible or not." The white-haired beauty completely ignored Liu Zhu's threat as she hurled her war hammer through the air. Ghostly chi and yin winds instantly erupted as the war hammer swelled drastically in size. The 8 skulls embedded on its surface also squirmed incessantly as they let loose a string of ghostly howls. Immediately thereafter, balls of green flames appeared out of thin air around the hammer, transforming it into a massive fireball. These green flames appeared to possess immense power, and as they burned with ferocious might, even the surrounding space was being warped and twisted. Liu Zhu stood off to the side in a completely expressionless manner with his arms crossed, patiently awaiting the white-haired beauty's attack. However, the crimson-robed figure suddenly narrowed his eyes as a peculiar look appeared on his face at the sight of the ghostly warhammer. The white-haired beauty let loose a loud cry, and the warhammer came crashing down toward the comparatively tiny brick. However, during its descent, the green flames around the hammer flared up significantly, before manifesting over 100 hammer projections that hurtled toward the crystalline brick from all directions. As such, this one attack was almost the equivalent of over 100 attacks. Liu Zhu faltered slightly upon seeing this, but a cold smile quickly appeared on his face. Loud rumbling booms rang out in rapid succession in the air above as if hundreds of thunderclaps were exploding at once, causing the nearby air to ring incessantly. The crimson-robed figure's expression changed slightly upon seeing this. Back when this war hammer was combating the black light formation within the underground palace, it hadn't appeared to be all that powerful, and only now was the crimson-robed figure realizing the true extent of its power. As for the tempered crystal brick, it had already been inundated by piercing green light, making it impossible to glean its current condition. Moments later, the white-haired beauty made a grabbing motion, and all of the hammer projections instantly disappeared with only the real hammer flying back as a ball of green light. She then cast her gaze toward the crystalline brick, and her expression darkened significantly. The tempered crystal brick had remained completely unscathed following that ferocious barrage. Its surface was completely smooth with not a single scratch to be seen. "So, you believe my claims now, right, fellow Taoist land? Even I won't be able to extract the divine infernal river elixir from the brick to split it among all of us," Liu Zhu said in a calm voice. "Seeing as that's the case, I have no choice but to give up on the divine elixir, but you have to accompany the 2 of us to the devilish tomb." The white-haired beauty heaved a long sigh as if she wanted to exhale all of the frustration in her heart. After that, she made a hand seal, and her suit of armor dissipated along with her war hammer, splitting up to form the 8 ghost monarchs again. "I have no objections there. The devilish tomb is quite far away from here, so even if we try to get there as soon as possible, it would still take us around half a month. Before that, shouldn't we track down a certain someone first?" Liu Zhu said as he waved a hand through the air, and the tempered crystal brick instantly disappeared on the spot. Even the other 2 demon monarchs couldn't identify how Liu Zhu had stowed the brick away. The white-haired beauty and the crimson-robed figure exchanged a glance with one another, and both of them were feeling even warier toward Liu Zhu. "That hand brat has our tracking marks planted in his body, so he won't be able to escape our detection even if he escapes to the other side of the spirit realm. To think that insolent brat would dare to steal my disciples away from me. Once I hunt him down using my tracking mark, I'll make him regret everything he's done." A sinister look appeared on the white-haired woman's face at the mention of Han Li. "He, you were always aware that your 2 disciples were acquainted with that Han brat somehow, yet you still planned to suck away their yin qi, so it's no wonder that Han brat came back to save them. In all honesty, I really do admire the kid. Not only did he manage to escape from the infernal lightning beasts, he stole your 2 disciples right under our noses." "Tisk tisk, Even the blood puppet avatar that I refined for so many years was unable to stop. He's got guts and powers in equal measure, the crimson-robed figure chuckled. HMPH, if you admire him so much, then why don't you take him as your disciple? Perhaps he'll outstrip you someday. The white-haired beauty harumphed coldly with a dark expression. I'm cultivating in the Tao of blood, so unless Han Brad is willing to let me suck out his essence and exchange his blood, there's no way that he'll be able to use my cultivation arts. Besides, I've always been alone, and I've never thought about passing my abilities on to others, so what use would I have for a disciple? Dai Zhu chuckled coldly. That Han Brat's cultivation base isn't very high, but he has a staggering number of tricks up his sleeve. On top of that, he's managed to progress so far on the path of simultaneous cultivation, and his powers far exceed that of beings of the same cultivation base. If he managed to progress to the body integration stage one day, then even all of us combined most likely won't be able to match him. Of course, it's yet to be seen whether he'll even be able to get to that point. After all, progression for those engaged in simultaneous cultivation is far more difficult than for normal cultivators, Liu Zhu mused. Simultaneous cultivation, are you certain that's the path he's taking? How do you know about this? The white-haired beauty exclaimed in surprise. The crimson-robed figure also faltered upon hearing this. I have an ability that allows me to assess the power of one's physical body. That kid is most likely a human cultivator from an obscure corner of the Tianyuan continent, rather than some flying spirit race being. I don't know how he managed to sneak into the trial for the holy disciples of the flying spirit race, but what I do know is that humans are physically one of the most feeble races on the Tianyuan continent, yet that Han Brat's body is no less than powerful than ours. Even normal treasures won't be able to harm his body, and in terms of combat prowess, he should be able to match late great spirit generals. If he possesses some other abilities that I'm unaware of, then perhaps even a normal late great spirit general wouldn't be a match for him, Liu Zhu analyzed. The white-haired beauty and the crimson-robed figure were both stunned by Liu Zhu's glowing assessment of Han Li, and as they glanced at one another, both of them could see their own astonishment mirrors in each other's eyes. They knew that Han Li was no ordinary being, but they merely assumed that his powers would be comparable to that of an early great spirit general or mid-great spirit general. You're saying that he can stand up against late great spirit generals as a mere late spirit general. There are indeed some abilities in this world that truly defy the natural order, but surely he can't compare to a being with such a significantly superior cultivation base. The white-haired beauty was quite skeptical toward Liu Zhu's claims. I actually believe in what Brother Liu Zhu is saying here. Many years ago, I encountered a spatial tempering stage human cultivator, yet that man was able to slay early body integration stage beings through the use of a sword formation. Humans may be naturally very fragile from birth, but they are certainly not to be underestimated, the crimson-robed being suddenly interjected. The white-haired beauty harumphed coldly as if she were unconvinced, but the indecisive look in her eyes indicated that she didn't really know what to believe. That's enough talk on this matter. That Han Brat does indeed have many secrets and possesses brilliant potential, but he has to realize that potential first to make it count. Our priority now is to find him and make him do our bidding. I don't know how he's been able to escape our detection for so long, but if we activate our tracking marks together, he won't be able to keep this up for much longer. If we want to get to the devilish tomb as quickly as possible, then we have to make haste, Liu Zhu said in a calm voice. Indeed, Brother Liu Zhu, fellow Taoist Lan, let's... What? My tracking mark has been eradicated. The crimson-robed figure chuckled and nodded in agreement, yet just as he was about to say something to the white-haired beauty, an expression of incredulity and rage suddenly appeared on his face. Is that so? Let me try. The white-haired beauty's heart jolted with shock, and she hurriedly closed her yis before attempting to activate her tracking mark. Moments later, she opened her eyes again, and a sinister look appeared on her face as she said, "My tracking mark is still there, but it's been completely sealed off. Brother Liu Zhu, activate your tracking mark as well. We'll wear him down together." Unfortunately, I won't be able to do that. My tracking mark already disappeared before fellow Taoist Dai Zhu's tracking mark, Liu Zhu replied calmly. What? The crimson-robed figure and the white-haired beauty were stunned to hear this. So that means only my tracking mark still remains in his body. The white-haired beauty's expression darkened even further. They had taken a massive risk to venture into the infernal river, and if they couldn't secure the divine infernal river elixir nor the devilish treasures, then they would have expended so much effort and incurred all that risk for nothing. Strangely enough, Liu Zhu remained very calm, and the crimson-robed figure also quickly calmed down following that initial fit of rage. Both of them seemed to be contemplating something while the white-haired beauty sat down in midair, with her legs crossed. At the same time, the 8 ghost monarchs behind her transformed into a burst of yin qi that surrounded her body, thereby enhancing her cultivation base significantly to allow her to try and activate the tracking seal within Han Li's body with all her might. The black qi surged erratically around her, and harrowing ghostly cries erupted from within. It was quite clear that the white-haired beauty was drawing on all the power she was capable of. Time slowly passed, and close to 2 hours flew by in the blink of an eye, yet the white-haired beauty still hadn't succeeded in her efforts. Liu Zhu and the crimson-robed figure merely waited patiently in silence, and neither of them tried to hurry her. A short while later, the white-haired beauty's enraged voice finally rang out. "My tracking mark has also been destroyed. There's no way that he could have done this on his own. Could this be Mu Qing's handiwork?" The black qi dissipated to reveal the white-haired beauty, with a thunderous expression on her face. "It could well be fellow Taoist Mu. She seems to be even more interested in the treasures of the devilish tomb than she is in the divine elixir," the crimson-robed figure mused as he stroked his chin. Despite their wiles, none of the demon monarchs had imagined that Yuan Yao and Yan Li would be capable of unleashing a yin qi gathering secret technique that could help Han Li eradicate the tracking marks one by one. Of course, that was also due to the fact that the ghost Dao cultivation arts they were using really were quite unique. A thought suddenly occurred to the white-haired beauty, and she asked, "Regardless of who's behind this, I'll make sure they pay for what they've done. Brother Daizu, those devilish artifacts are more important to you than either Brother Liu Zhu or myself, right? Despite that, you've managed to keep remarkably calm. Could it be that you have some other tricks up your sleeve?" Liu Zhu also turned toward the crimson-robed figure, with a hint of a smile on his face. The crimson-robed figure chuckled in response before replying, "I did indeed plant something else on Han Brat's body, but it'll still be quite difficult to find him. I won't be able to track him down as accurately as I could with my tracking mark, but I should be able to ascertain his approximate location with no issues. Having said that, though, that Han Brat sure is alert. He's resisted the urge to summon the spirit servants I gave him even once. Otherwise, he would have already fallen victim to my secret technique, and none of this would have happened. Letter 1D4 1F, letter 1D69B, letter 1D556, letter 1D6AT, letter 1D568, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D4 1C, letter 1D5FC, letter 1D5FA. A peculiar look appeared on the white-haired beauty's face, and her brows furrowed as she said, "Now's not the time for jokes, Brother Daizu. With Han Brat's powerful spiritual sense, how could it have escaped his notice that you planted a secret technique on those spirit servants? Haha, there's nothing actually wrong with the spirit servants themselves. The key lies in the captivation blood pact that I invented and infused into those spirit servants. As long as anyone injects their spiritual sense into those spirit servants and uses them once, they'll definitely be unable to escape the allure of this secret technique. They'll want to use the spirit servants a second time, then a third time, until they're completely entranced by them and lose their sense of self. It's just a pity that he hasn't even used them once up to this point. Otherwise, I'd definitely be able to detect it and control him without him even realizing that anything was amiss." The crimson-robed figure seemed to be of the opinion that there was no point in hiding anything, seeing as they were about to enter the devilish tomb soon, so he decided to reveal everything to the other 2 demon monarchs. The white-haired beauty's expression changed slightly, and she fell speechless upon hearing this. Liu Zhu was also clearly taken aback by Daizu's devious plan. "But if Han Brat hasn't used those spirit servants, then how will you be able to detect his location?" the white-haired beauty asked. "That's quite simple. I infused the bodies of the spirit servants with some meridian stone." Daizu chuckled coldly in a sinister manner. "Meridian stone? That's an extremely strange material that takes on a yang attribute every noon and midnight, thereby allowing them to detect one another. In that case, you must also be carrying one of those stones yourself. Only in places rife with yin qi like the infernal river will this material's detection properties be able to take effect. Under normal circumstances, we wouldn't be able to make use of that effect. I'm really surprised that you were able to find such a gimmicky item. As far as I know, our Tian Yuan continent doesn't even produce this type of stone, and they also have extremely limited uses for cultivators like us." On this occasion, even Liu Zhu couldn't help but praise Daizu's resourcefulness. "I didn't intentionally seek out this item. Many years ago, I killed a being from another continent, and they just so happened to be in possession of a small piece of this material. I decided to keep it more so due to its rarity than anything else, but who would have thought that it'd actually come in useful? The stones will only detect one another for an instant on the exact strokes of noon and midnight, and Han Brat himself doesn't have another meridian stone, so there's no way he'd be able to notice that anything's amiss, the crimson-robed figure said with a cunning gleam in his eyes. Haha, that's brilliant. It's not far from midnight now, so let's head toward the direction where the tracking marks disappeared first. Using the detection properties of the meridian stone, we should be able to track him down. Just make sure to look out for that mayfly race puppet with the silver chopper. That chopper seems to be the legendary 5-dragon chopper, which is a divine spirit treasure that ranks very high on the chaotic myriad spirit roll, so it's best to directly oppose it if we do encounter it. As for those 2 infernal lightning beasts, they won't get far away from their lair, so we don't need to worry about them anymore, Liu Zhu cautioned as he looked up into the sky. Come to think of it, neither of us had thought that you'd have a way to combat the 5-dragon chopper, brother Liu Zhu. It was all thanks to you that we were able to force back that puppet and make our escape, the white-haired beauty chuckled. You're too kind, fellow Taoist Lan. That puppet wasn't forced back by me. It had simply overexerted its spiritual sense while using the 5-dragon chopper and was forced to retreat of its own accord. Otherwise, if the battle had dragged on for slightly longer, I would have fallen victim to that chopper. Liu Zhu shook his head with a hint of fear in his eyes. The white-haired beauty and the crimson-robed figure exchanged a glance, and their faces also paled slightly as they recalled the events that had unfolded in the underground palace following Han Li's departure. The abilities unleashed by the 5-dragon chopper had been truly fearsome. If the puppet had unleashed the full power of the treasure before Liu Zhu had broken free from the golden formation over the green pond, then there was a good chance that both of them would have already perished. We don't need to be overly concerned, though. Even though the 5-dragon chopper is extremely fearsome, the puppet had completely overexerted its spiritual sense, so it's yet to be seen whether it can come after us again. As long as we remain alert and avoid being divided and conquered, we should be fine, Liu Zhu said as he recovered his composure. The white-haired beauty and the crimson-robed figure both nodded in agreement upon hearing this. After that, the 3 demon monarchs didn't delay any longer as they sped away into the distance. Deep within the infernal, crimson light flashed in front of a white cave, and a crimson-armored puppet stumbled out of space. It raised a foot and was just about to stride forward, only for spiritual light to flash erratically all over its body, and it fell flat onto the ground. A ringing sound then erupted from the puppet's body as a silver streak of light flew out of its body, then disappeared into the cave. Why are you in such a sorry state? Could it be that my 5-dragon chopper wasn't powerful enough? The voice of the elderly man sounded again, and it was just as flat and indifferent as ever. Indeed, there were very few things in this world that could attract its interest. Green light flashed in the puppet's eyes before it struggled to its feet, and it replied in a respectful voice, "The 5-dragon chopper is unfathomably powerful, but I was far too useless, and my spiritual sense was unable to support the chopper. Otherwise, all of the intruders would be dead already. Your spiritual sense was insufficient. You must have unleashed the power of the 5-dragon chopper twice, and used it for too long on both occasions, right?" The elderly voice remained completely emotionless, as if it were simply elaborating something completely inconsequential. I was too greedy. I didn't unleash the full power of the 5-dragon chopper from the beginning as I wanted to lure out all of the outsiders before killing them together. But there was a traitor from our race among them who possessed an ability that was able to withstand the power of the 5-dragon chopper for a short period of time. The backup measures that I'd set up had also been ruined due to unforeseen circumstances, thereby allowing them to escape, the crimson-armored puppet replied in a feeble voice. I see. The elderly voice in the cave merely gave a clipped response before falling silent. All of a sudden, the crimson-armored puppet raised its voice slightly and said, "Senior Jiang, I have one more request." I seem to recall that you've already requested a favor from me. Don't expect me to fight for your mayfly race. The elderly voice cooled slightly upon hearing this. I wouldn't dare to dream of something like that. I only wanted to request Senior Jiang to use this remaining shred of my spiritual sense to guide my true body into this infernal river. Those intruders have already taken the divine elixir, and if I don't recover the elixir, I'll be dealt a severe punishment, the crimson-armored puppet explained. Guide your true body here. Have you gone mad? Mayfly beings can't stay in this place for any extended period of time or their cultivation bases will be severely damaged by the yin qi here. From the sounds of it, the intruders are all quite powerful, so even if your true body arrives here, you most likely won't be a match for them anyway. Could it be that you want to borrow my 5-dragon chopper again? A hint of surprise had finally crept into the elderly man's voice. I do indeed intend to borrow your 5-dragon chopper again, Senior Jiang, but I may not actually need to use it this time as my true body would be arriving here with a divine nest, the crimson-armored puppet replied in a grim voice. A divine nest? Hee, am I hearing this right? You're going to use such a thing just to take care of a few golden Mayfly tier beings. Speaking of which, how do you have the power to use such a thing? If I recall correctly, those things have always been under the control of those old monsters in your Mayfly race. Aren't they the trump cards of your race that wouldn't be used unless your race was on the brink of collapse? The elderly man in the cave was truly intrigued now.